Chapter 1. Awakening. Life is strange. Sometimes when we least expect it, things change. They change so completely, so irreversibly, that we can never go back even if we want to. Sometimes that change is something we seek. Sometimes it is something that we choose. But many times it is simply something we have thrust upon us. This is what happened in a single day, a single moment, for every living person of two great villages. Uzumaki Naruto, blonde-haired and cerulean-eyed, had just been sent flying backward by multiple Jukin strikes by his opponent. He picked himself up off the ground and knew he was hurt. He was simply too slow to get inside the older boy's defense. He had been so proud, making it into the finals of the Chunin exams. He was so filled with purpose when Hyuga Neji had been declared his opponent. He would avenge Hinata's loss in the preliminaries. He was so excited at the thought of the training he'd receive from his sensei, only for those thoughts to be dashed when his sensei had run off on him with his teammate. He had really hoped the man would help him, been so happy to finally get some individual training and advance himself. It had been hard for him not to cry at the disappointment he felt that day, but he had persevered. Naruto coughed as he felt a trickle of blood run down his chin and spit out a mouthful of his own life fluids to the ground. It was times like this Naruto wished more than anything he had a family, a true friend, someone who cared about him and understood him. A person who accepted him unconditionally for who he was and would supported him through every difficult moment without question, someone who he could call family. But it was also times like this he was reminded of what he lacked. He could hear them. Their voices were all around him. "Kill the demon Hyuga," they screamed. "Kick his ass Hyuga." They would cheer. "Not laughing now, brat," they would taunt him. He knew Irika was looking down on him with a concerned expression. He was just too kind for his own good. The ramen chef Tucci and his daughter Ayami were likely in the stands too, and the old man Hokage was watching him. But deep down, as kind as they were, none of them were a replacement for a family and people who had loved him his entire life. And it was times like this when he wanted that support more than anything. Naruto was no stranger to self-doubt or life's hard lessons, but in that moment, he raised himself back up again. His sensei was nowhere to be seen, his teammate was not here, and his other teammate didn't really care about him. Naruto knew she didn't care, but kept hoping she would accept him. He just couldn't stop hoping to gain a little acceptance. He also knew deep down what he wanted from her was attention and validation. But hidden under every smile was the knowledge she would never give him that. And at times like this, when he was at his lowest, those thoughts rose to the surface to taunt him. "Are you ready to continue, Uzumaki?" the dark-haired boy asked him with a look of superiority on his face. "Fate has already determined this match, Uzumaki. You cannot defeat me. Submit and surrender. There is no reason for you to continue to greater injury." Naruto looked into the pale eyes of his opponent and nodded with a grim look of determination. He raised himself into a shaky taijutsu stance and breathed a moment. The boy in front of him, Neji, stood silently watching his opponent. Neji may have assumed his victory, but he was no fool. He would not underestimate his opponent, even if it was the knucklehead. He had seen what that had cost Kiba a mere month before, and while he was prideful, he was not a fool. Suddenly, Naruto broke into a burst of speed as Neji stood still and entered his Jukin stance. "Faster, move faster, damn it," Naruto thought to himself as he struck across with his left flowing into a roundhouse kick. Neji blocked the punch and spun to easily avoid the kick before bringing his hand up and slapping Naruto across the face with a smirk on his features. "Damn it, why can't I move faster? I can't keep up with him," Naruto thought to himself as he continued to press his assault. Left, right, sweeping cross with his leg, followed by an uppercut, but nothing worked. Neji simply avoided it all. All of the frustration and pain welled up inside Naruto. He could hear the taunts and insults even more clearly now that Neji had backed up near the wall of the arena. He felt the remorse, the sense of longing, his hopes and dreams, and the crushing reality grinding them to dust. His entire body straining to push itself to be faster than before to catch the Hyuga prodigy, but failing to match the older boy's speed. Then it happened, something that would change the world. Neji decided he was tired of waiting, tired of letting Uzumaki Naruto attack, and decided it was time to end this match decisively. But as Neji moved to strike Naruto, the blonde's perception changed. and suddenly Niji seemed to slow down. It was as if he was moving in slow motion. Naruto's cerulean eyes seemed to almost glow, and he stepped to the side and struck Niji in his unprotected left flank. Then reality seemed to snap back, and Niji felt the strike and the speed that the blonde moved. He was shocked and jumped away from the panting blonde. What the hell? Where did that burst of speed come from? Niji thought to himself, certain he had a bruised rib if not broken. No matter. It only shows I need to stop playing and finish this. Naruto felt different. His entire body felt odd. It was as if every nerve was tightened, every muscle renewed and coursing with energy. He felt lighter than ever before, but his mind, it felt open. It was such an odd experience. He was able to perceive so much more around him, and he felt something different, some kind of strange pull or trigger in his mind. He reached for it with his chakra, but before he could experiment, he immediately saw Niji closing the distance between them. But again, Niji seemed to be moving in slow motion. Naruto stepped to the side and brought his knee into Niji's gut. The pure speed and strength of the blow caught Niji by surprise. He had never seen anyone move so fast before. It was like fighting the legendary Sharingan, but Naruto's eyes remained a piercing blue. Niji couldn't understand what was happening. Fate had decreed he be victorious. What was going on? How was he suddenly losing his match when his opponent had all but been beaten mere moments before? Naruto pressed his advantage this time. He blocked the slow counter and proceeded to slam his fist into Niji's face. The boy had tried to stop the attack, but had simply been too slow to do anything. Niji quickly broke away and jumped to gain some distance, but now Naruto wanted to try something new out. With every passing second, he could feel a building pressure in his mind. The only thing it would be compared to would be a chambered round in a gun with a hammer being cocked back. And Naruto, being the unpredictable young man he was, couldn't help but pull that trigger. In a single moment, everything changed. All anyone saw was a bright flash of yellow light, and Niji was nothing more than an indentation in the side of the wall of the arena, and silence reigned throughout the stadium. But if we were to look through the eyes of Uzumaki Naruto, we would see so much more. Naruto pictured himself right next to Naruto as he pulled the trigger. Suddenly, he felt his entire body squeezed as if through a tight space, and then, as if by some magic, he was there, right next to Niji, right where he had envisioned himself. He punched Niji with a right cross. He pulled the trigger again and was suddenly in front of Niji, where he delivered a vicious knee to his chin before delivering a vicious kick to the stomach, sending Niji into the wall, where Naruto was already waiting to deliver several more punches and kicks, each preceded with a pull of the trigger in his mind. Naruto had no clue what he was doing. It just clicked. It felt so natural to him. It was as if everything he knew suddenly made sense. He could sense everything around him. He knew where everyone was. Their individual chakra signatures were like beacons to him. It was like a radar system in his mind. He didn't just feel them. He could almost see them. They were like giant glowing flames with slight distinctions. He knew with a single thought he could appear at any of them the way he had Niji. And as quickly as it happened, it ended. Naruto was standing in front of Niji, panting heavily. He was so tired. His entire body felt like it was burning from effort. His muscles were on fire from being squeezed over and the amount of force that had been running through them. As he tried to catch his breath, his body was hit with the realization. It was exhausted, and he nearly collapsed. He couldn't even begin to understand what had happened or what it meant. Naruto merely tried to catch his breath and remain standing. Niji was much worse for wear, though. His body was literally indented into the solid rock wall of the arena. He obviously had several broken bones and was mercifully unconscious if his hanging head was any indication. There were bruises already forming on the visible portions of his skin, and his breathing was dangerously shallow. Naruto stared at what he had done, trying to process that it had been him who had put the older boy in that condition. The crowd had been shocked into silence. The Hokage's eyes widened at what had happened, and realization began to dawn on him at the same time as the man sitting next to him began to grin behind his face mask, a horrible, nasty grin of pure, unrelenting joy. The first to recover enough to speak was the protector, who merely whispered in a shocked voice, "Winner, Uzumaki Naruto." And with that, in a single instant, a single moment, everything in the world changed. Chapter 2. Family. Sarutobi Hiruzen, third Hokage, known throughout the lands as the Professor, sat in shocked silence by what he had just witnessed. The old Hokage's mind was still processing the scene that had unfolded before him. He had seen many things in his nearly 60 years of life, but none of them surpassed what had just happened. At first, he had thought Naruto was simply holding back. After all, Jiraiya had been training the boy for the past few weeks. Then the boy had seemed to literally speed up, even almost beyond the old Kage's vision, but for just a few moments, and then returned to his normal speed. Then it happened a second time, and it became obvious that Naruto was as surprised by the change in his speed as the Hyuga boy. Then in a single moment, Sarutobi realized his mistake. It hadn't been simply an advancement in Naruto's speed or abilities. Naruto's skills had increased that dramatically. Naruto was truly shocked by what was happening to him. And it was in that moment that everything changed and the arena had been filled with the bright light of a yellow flash. Even as the words of the proctor registered in his brain, he could hear others beginning to overcome their shock. That was the Hiraishin, the fourth Hokage's technique. How does he know that? The demon's taunting us. He kind of looks like the fourth. 1,000 thoughts entered into his mind as the third Hokage knew he needed to rein in the situation immediately before it got out of hand. Excuse me, Kazekage-san, but I have an internal situation to see to. Cat and Crow with me. The old Hokage of Konoha vanished in a swirl of wind and leaves to appear next to the blonde boy. Jinmaken moved to the next fight. I don't care if sponsors came to view the last Uchiha. He is considered disqualified, and you are to move through the list. As Naruto's guardian, I am exercising Law 571 Article 12 and taking Naruto for an immediate screening by a medic. I will have him back before his next fight. Cat, I want another 5 teams of Chunin in the stadium immediately to handle any fights which may break out from this situation. Crow, retrieve Jiraiya immediately. Tell him the fourth's legacy has been revealed. Hi. The two Enbu responded before vanishing in Shunshin's. The Hokage placed a hand and offered Naruto a gentle smile as the tired boy looked up at him, too exhausted even to speak. With that, they vanished from the stadium to appear in the underground medical facility. As Uchiha Sasuke has not arrived on time, he is disqualified, and Gaara no Sabaku advances. Kinkuru no Sabaku and Aburame Shino report to the floor. Gunma announced despite the fact that the crowd was obviously no longer paying attention. Medical center below the stadium. The old Hokage arrived to find his student already waiting. The white-haired Sannin was leaning against the wall and gave his sensei a nod of greeting. I figured you'd want to see me, sensei. I was watching the entire incident. It was obvious to anyone that Jiraiya was upset. His posture might have appeared relaxed, but there was stress around his eyes and a haunted look to his features, as if he was trying to pull himself from the past. Naruto looked up at the white-haired pervert and felt a surge of gratitude for coming to watch his fight. He gave the old ninja a cheesy smile of gratitude. I kicked his ass, Ero Sennin. With a roll of his eyes, the old Sannin smiled slightly, but was unable to lose the stiffness in his posture as ruffled Naruto's hair. That you did, Gaki. Good job. Knowing they had a limited amount of time, the Hokage decided he needed to step in before the two started a blow-by-blow replay of the fight. Jiraiya, I need you to check the seal immediately for any problems, Sarutobi told him. Had to put on a show, Hagaki? Alrighty. Lift up your shirt so I can check and make sure everything is alright with your seal. Jiraiya told him with forced cheerfulness. I also need you to tell him the truth, Jiraiya. After this incident, rumors will spread everywhere. He is now your primary responsibility and will require your protection, the Sannin's old sensei told him even as he saw Jiraiya freeze at the words. Hiruzen knew it wasn't fair to ask this of his student. He also knew it was his fault for what was about to happen, but it had been the best choice at the time. The two exchanged a quick glance, one whose meaning was utterly clear. Jiraiya blamed him still for how Naruto had grown up, and Sarutobi clearly said if Jiraiya didn't tell him, he would. I suppose it is long overdue, Jiraiya muttered as he felt a chill enter his spine as Naruto looked between the two, but Jiraiya moved before he could voice his confusion. Jiraiya kneeled to Naruto's height and placed a heavy hand on the boy's shoulder. He could see the blonde was exhausted. Even beyond anything that the Sannin had seen during their training month, It was probably the reason why the boy had been so quiet so far. Naruto, I knew your mother and father. I was your father's sensei. I was, well, very close to them. He told the blonde-haired youth as tears began to water in his eyes. Your father was like a son to me, and when we found out you were going to be born, they asked me to be your godfather and guardian should something happen to them. No. You were named after a character in my first book because your dad liked it so much. Tears were openly flowing down the Sanin's face as he remembered the day Minato had informed him he intended to name his son after his sensei's book. Naruto stared at the old man in front of him. Every lonely night, he had cried himself to sleep. Every time he had sat alone on the swing. Every time he had watched from afar as other families walked away from him with their smiles came crashing down into his heart. The shock of emotions nearly rent Naruto into pieces to discover he had a godfather, a guardian, a man who should have taken care of him. And despite the warring emotions within him, only one question came to his mind, and in his confusion, he barely whispered a single word. Why? That single word was enough to terrify Jiraiya. It was said with so much raw emotion. The loneliness, the pain, everything the boy had suffered for 13 years was in that single word, and he was asking for an answer from the man who could have made all of it go away. The man whose responsibility it had been to protect him and watch over him and drive the darkness away. And the piercing blue eyes stared at him waiting for an answer. They dove into Jiraiya slowly, steadily, and begged him to answer. As much as Jiraiya wanted to look away, he didn't. He didn't shut eyes to his godson's pain or to the raw emotions welling inside himself. He let them flow and faced them as he had not done in years. Naruto, I wanted to take you with me. Sensei and I, we talked about it for hours after your father died. We knew that if you came with me, you'd be forced to grow up on the road, and my work would take us into some of the worst places on the planet. Even more than that, I knew if I was seen with you, it would be obvious whose son you were. Your father earned many enemies in his time, and all would try to kill you before your first year was out, despite any protection I might be able to offer you. Taking a deep breath, Jiraiya continued, I did everything I could to help you. I sent you those gifts on your birthday, Gamakan and your sleeping cap and that orange jumpsuit even. I paid for your apartment and tuition to the Ninja Academy. I asked Sensei every time I wrote him what you were like and how you were doing. I squashed any rumors and left false trails for anyone who might be trying to find you. I came back just to watch you in the Chunin exams and planned to meet you at the hot springs that day. I wanted to train you, to teach you everything I know, and I still do. Jiraiya continued, his pace quickening as he came to his conclusion. I wanted to be here for you, Naruto, and I know I can't make up for the past, and I know it is cold comfort to know that I was looking out for you from behind the scenes when you needed me by your side all of these years. But I want to teach you everything I know, and I want to protect you. I know you may never accept me as your godfather, and you might never be able to forgive me, but I just hope you'll give me the chance to redeem myself for not behind here all these years and accept my training as your father did. Jiraiya bowed his head as he finished, unable to take the look coming from Naruto's eyes as he absorbed the words that Jiraiya had spoken. Naruto, Sarutobi said, I think you should know it took a lot of convincing to get Jiraiya to leave you here. He had adoption paperwork already filled out for you even before the night was over. He was going to take you, and I take full responsibility for him leaving you. I felt it was better that you grow up here where you would be safer in anonymity and the possibility of friendship. I never expected the village to circumvent me or ignore the fourths the way they did. I also think you should know Jiraiya wrote letters weekly asking about you and had me send him pictures of your pranks. He always wanted to know about you. The old Hokage told the young man in front of him. You wanted pictures of my pranks? Naruto asked in a quiet voice. I still have them. I keep them on me when I travel and look at them at night. You might look like your dad, but you act just like your mom, Jiraiya said with a hint of a smile as his eyes gained a faded look to them as he remembered the red head that had stolen his pupil's heart. Who were they? Naruto asked. The one question he had wanted an answer to for so long. The one thing he had always been denied as part of his identity. Who were his parents? Before the Hokage could stop them, Jiraiya answered. Your father was my greatest pupil and the fourth Hokage Naruto, Minato Namikaze, and your mother was the last of the Uzumaki clan, cousins of the Senju, Kushina Uzumaki. Naruto, You must understand that we kept this information secret to keep you safe. If IWA or any other number of enemies your parents made learned you were alive, they would have stopped at nothing to see you dead in vengeance for your parents," the old Kage told him. Naruto wasn't sure what to think. His mom and dad had loved him, wanted him. He was the son of the fourth. And even now he was being offered what he longed for ever since he could remember. A family. Yet that same family could have been there for him his entire life. But he had worked in every other way he could to help him. It was all so confusing for Naruto, and he wasn't sure how to take it all in. He tried again and again to work things through in his head, but one thing always returned: family. Naruto could see the pain that Jiraiya carried inside him. It was clear he hadn't wanted to leave Naruto as a baby, and it had taken convincing and almost an order from the Hokage to force him to do so. Now he was asking for a second chance. As much as Naruto wanted to be angry at him, as much as he wanted to yell and scream, and as much as he wanted to rant that the old pervert should have been there from the beginning, the thought of finally having a family brought him up short. "Would you stay with me?" he asked hesitantly. "Naruto, that's all I ever wanted to do. And it will always be my greatest regret that I wasn't there for you as you grew up," Jiraiya told him as he tried to convey his regret and pain through the words. Tears formed in Naruto's eyes. "I'm not sure how I'll feel later. It is all so confusing. I'm angry at both of you, and yet happy to know I was loved and wanted, but I'd like that. If you'd stay, that is, Godfather." With those few words, they found themselves in a tight embrace as the Hokage smiled softly. He knew they did not have long, but that this was a necessity, and he motioned for the medic who had appeared at the door to wait in silence as the two shinobi before him finally gained something they had each yearned for: a family. It would be a long road ahead for them. Jiraiya carried many emotional scars, and Naruto would have to work through much of his own anger and resentment, but it was a start. A small step, but a good one nonetheless. With a polite cough, the Hokage brought them back to reality. "Naruto-kun, would you please lift up your shirt so Jiraiya can check your seal? And Izumi-san here will perform a scan of your body." With a nod, Naruto positioned himself on the bed and laid back as he lifted his shirt. Jiraiya channeled some chakra into the seal to bring out and began to examine it. "I don't see anything wrong with it, Sarutobi-sensei. Everything looks perfectly fine. I guess that what happened likely had no effect at all on the seal itself. But I'll keep an eye on it to be sure prolonged use doesn't cause any problems," Jiraiya told his old sensei. Izumi, meanwhile, was running several medical scans. The most important was a bloodline scan. While they would need to take blood samples later for more definite proof, the scan would give at least an initial indication of whether a bloodline limit had appeared. "I don't see anything wrong, Hokage-sama. From all appearances, Naruto-san is in good health, although his body is in extreme stages of exhaustion. The bloodline scan does indicate that he has awakened a bloodline limit, but there is no match currently. We will have to take a sample later for a more definite test," she informed them. Before the conversation could continue, Crow appeared within the room. "Hokage-sama, Uzumaki-san's fight with Gaara no Sabaku will begin shortly. He must return or be disqualified." With a nod, Jiraiya placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder. "I'll take him back up. Kick his ass, Naruto. I know you can do it." Jiraiya looked down into the face of his godson, and simply the knowledge that someone cared for him, that he had a family watching him and cheering for him, sent renewed vigor into the blond boy. "I'll make you proud, Godfather." With a smile, the two vanished in a swirl of wind and leaves to appear in the middle of the stadium. And then all hell broke loose. Chapter 3: Gaara of the Sand. Hiruzen had tried to stop him. He had wanted to stop them. But the look on his student's face when he said he would take Naruto back to the arena was too much for the old man. It was a look of pride and happiness he had not seen on Jiraiya in almost 13 years. And it stalled him just long enough to let Jiraiya and Naruto escape. "I suppose it would happen sooner or later since Jiraiya is going to take over his care and training. Might as well let them have their moment," the old Kage thought to himself before smirking at the thought of the reaction they were going to get and disappearing in wind, and leaves to retake his seat to watch the show. The moment the blonde-haired Uzumaki Naruto appeared with the white-haired Sannin, the entire stadium erupted. Despite calming down slightly as Gunma pushed the matches along, the thought of their greatest hero's abilities living on was on the forefront of every spectator's mind. Potential clients were imagining the possibilities. Shinobi were trying to figure out how he had learned the technique, and civilians weren't sure what to think. That this child, the carrier of the Kyubi no Yoko, the demon brat, the pariah of Konoha, had used the Hiroshin raised both questions and thoughts of grief and anger among the people of Konoha. The stadium appeared split into factions. Some were calling for his death for taunting them, for stealing their hero's technique. Another group was cheering for him. More than once the name Namikaze was shouted. Lastly, there seemed to be thousands cheering for him to repeat his performance with Niji against Gaara. Naruto wasn't sure how to take the thunder from the stadium as the screams and cheers mixed together to form an unintelligible roar, but when he felt Jiraiya's hand on his shoulder give him a firm, comforting squeeze, relief immediately spread through him. I'm not alone, Naruto thought to himself and took a deep breath before and looked up at his godfather and sensei. Kick his ass, Naruto-kun, Jiraiya told him with a big smile. You got it, godfather, Naruto told him with a grin in response. The exchange was not lost on many in the crowd who remembered another Chunin exam some 2 decades prior. In their minds, they saw the overlay before him as the white-haired Sannin had once before stood with another blonde-haired boy, and many minds began to click then and there. Why Naruto had been chosen, how Kushina and Minato had always been seen together, Kushina's pregnancy, the date of his birth, his looks and personality, it all came crashing down, and thousands began to realize they had made one blindingly glaring error in their lives. And as the citizens and shinobi of Konoha connected the dots, a similar thought passed through their minds. The fourth's last request wasn't to treat a random boy as a hero and keep him safe, but to treat his own son as a hero and raise him and keep him safe. My God, what have we done? Jiraiya vanished in a swirl of wind and leaves to take his place by the Hokage's side to watch his godson face the most dangerous opponent in the tournament. Naruto stared at the red-haired boy in front of him and gave a nod. Mother wants your blood. Will you prove my existence? The monotone voice of Gaara asked. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the question. Mother? Who are you talking about? Gaara merely stared at him in a motionless face. He knew no fear, but after seeing what the blonde had done to his opponent, Gaara was more than willing to view the boy as worthy of his time. Genma looked between the boys and with a nod raised his hand. Begin. Mother wants your blood. You will die this day, Uzumaki. Show me. Show me that power. Prove my existence. Gaara shouted as streams of sand burst from around him to attack Naruto. The sand broke into 4 separate strands from the gourd on his back. They weaved and bobbed, the streams mixing and unmixing as they flowed toward their blonde-haired target. Naruto jumped back, avoiding the sand at all costs. With the price of failing to avoid the sand well in his mind, Naruto worked continuously to avoid it. He remembered what happened to Lee and would not be caught so easily. It was such a strange sensation to Naruto. Once again he felt into his mind for the trigger that now was so obvious to his consciousness. But while he wrapped his churka around the trigger, the radar seemed to automatically activate with little to no obvious cost to his reserves. The sand that Gaara was using was infused with his own churka. Because of this, Naruto's new ability allowed him to see the churka moving toward him from no matter the direction. He could easily pinpoint which way they were going from the way the chakra moved within the sand, directing it. It was like watching a puppet's strings being pulled and knowing which way the puppet would move when each string was pulled. As each grain of sand moved in response to the chakra, and Naruto's radar saw it, granting him advance warning before the full bulk of the sand moved together. Each grain was acting like a tell for the boy, and no one knew it as he dodged effortlessly through the sand sent before him. Gaara's eyes narrowed at the blonde's movements, trying to figure out how he was avoiding his attacks. He didn't have the Sharingan, so he shouldn't be capable of predicting the movements of his sand, yet it was almost like he could see where the sand was going to be before it got there. As the fight wore on, Gaara continued to remain motionless, and his frustration rose, and he decided to switch tactics. All of a sudden, the sand pulled back and massed together to create a massive wave heading toward the blonde. Naruto's new ability would be useless against a widespread attack. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto jumped back and stuck his feet to the wall of the stadium as he jumped over the sand wall. Naruto was breathing hard now. He wasn't sure how much longer he could continue to dodge Gaara's attacks like this. Despite everything, his use of the new abilities were draining on him, and he was still extremely tired from the first fight. He recognized his movements becoming more and more sluggish, and it wouldn't be long before he made a mistake. Knowing his Kagebushin would prove useless in this fight, Naruto decided to try the same trick that had defeated Neji so easily. He wasn't sure if he was just getting used to it, but the squeezed and compressed feeling on his body did not feel quite so bad this time around. But even still, it hurt like hell and left his body feeling like it had just gotten pressed flat by a steamroller. But it was all worth it as he appeared behind his enemy in a flash of yellow light and proceeded to pound Gaara's backside with his fists as quickly as he could. Gaara immediately knew he was in trouble the moment he saw the flash of light, and the blonde before him vanished, followed by the vicious attacks coming to his back and right sides. When he turned, however, the blonde had already disappeared and was now to his left. His sand armor was peeling off him as his body took a pummeling he had never felt before. Gaara tried to bring his sand back to him to protect himself. He tried to form his ultimate defense, but the speed of the attacks, his inability to defend himself, it drove his concentration from him, and he was unable to command his sand. He was disoriented from the feeling of his entire body being pounded, and all of a sudden, he felt his stomach take a massive shot, and he was hurtled to the wall, just as Neji was before him. Gaara's head lolled around him, his eyes wide as he let out an ear-piercing scream. He was in pain. For the first time in his life, he felt pain. His right arm was broken. He had cracked ribs and bruised muscles from the pure force of the number of strikes made on him. Never before had the red head been so badly hurt, and it was drove him beyond the last vestiges of sanity. His eyes focused on the source of his pain. Naruto was on one knee. Sweat was dripping from his forehead as he struggled to regain his breath. He was tired, too damn tired. But as he saw the other boy scream, a sense of utter foreboding entered his soul, and he knew he had to finish things now, or they would get much, much worse. Naruto struggled to his feet. He could feel the exhaustion in his body as he forced himself forward, trying to find the last scraps of his chakra for one final flash attack, as he had come to think of the new ability. Pushing the exhaustion from his mind, willing his tired body to move, he launched himself in a final move that brought his fist into the sand boy's stomach with enough force to cause cracks to appear in the wall and rendering Gaara of the sand unconscious. Sweat was dripping off Naruto as he fell to a knee and struggled to regain his breath. Before he could even stand, he heard a swirl of wind, and leaves were felt behind him. Kakashi and Sasuke had finally arrived. Chapter 4. Jiraiya smiled as he watched his godson fight. The kid was obviously seeing something no one else could by his movements and ability to uncannily avoid the sand moving around him, but at the same time it was also obvious he was tired. That thought caused Jiraiya to frown slightly. Why is he so tired? Is it simply because of whatever strange bloodline he is activating, or is it simply the use of the bloodline? Minato, what were you hiding with that Hiroshin technique? Jiraiya thought to himself. Seated next to him, the Kazekage was also admiring the blonde boy in the arena before them, but for a different reason, magnificent. Even the Sharingan eyes pale in comparison to such a beautiful bloodline ability. With such power under my control, entire armies would die in the blink of an eye. No one could stand before me. Jiraiya frowned as he saw the sand beginning to sluggishly pull toward the boy in an attempt to cover him in his pain, and realized the boy was no longer in control. Whatever was controlling the sand was trying to take over, and as Naruto rendered the child unconscious, he let out a quiet sigh of relief. Damn, the brat just won 2 matches in record time. Impressive, don't you think, sensei? Jiraiya asked his mentor. Very. The bloodline he has awakened appears to be just as powerful as his father's, the old Kage responded. Listening intently, the Kazekage perked up. And just who is the boy's father, Hokage-san? Let us not play games, Kazekage-sama. I doubt there is anyone in the stadium who will not put the facts together. He is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, the son of Minato Namikaze and heir to the Uzumaki clan, stated Hiruzen while he quietly puffed on his pipe. That could have been trouble. Nice work, brat. I am surprised Sensei would give up his parentage so easily, but I suppose there is no point in hiding it any longer, he thought to himself with a small smile before his eyes narrowed at the arrival of his godson Sensei and teammate. With a quick nod to his smiling sensei, Jiraiya formed a vanished in a seal-less Shunshin. Within the arena, Kakashi was trying to take everything in before looking at Genma. We're not too late, right? Genma sighed. Yes, Sasuke is disqualified from participation for not arriving on time. Apparently your tardiness is contagious, Kakashi-san. Sasuke, however, was ignoring both of them as he looked at the opponent Naruto had just defeated his opponent. Naruto was on his knee, breathing hard as he slowly rose to his feet and began to finally steady his breathing. Naruto was tired beyond belief. He was amazed he could even stand up at this point. He knew he needed a rest before he could fight anyone else. It was such an odd feeling, he noted as he looked at his hands. There was hardly a mark on him from the fight, but his entire body felt like it had been crushed by the sand the boy used. Shaking his head, he turned back to the sand shinobi. Naruto looked at Gaara and sighed before placing a hand on the boy's shoulder and pulling him down from the indentation he had created in the wall and gently laying him on the ground. Naruto, so. Kakashi began as he began to walk over to his student, only to have Jiraiya appear between them and gave him a cold look before turning hot the blonde and smiling. Nice work there, kid. You really took him down. I don't think your old man would have done better when he was your age, Jiraiya said as he rubbed Naruto's head with one hand and laughed. Naruto smiled tiredly and nodded to his godfather. Something was weird at the end there. His chakra was changed. It was like mine. Jiraiya nodded. I'll take a look while he's in the infirmary, he murmured quietly. Kakashi coughed, finally garnering the attention, and gave a weak-eye smile. Hey Naruto, how'd it go? Naruto looked at the sensei who had abandoned him for his teammate. He saw said teammate standing next to his sensei glaring at him, and he just wasn't sure what to say. Part of him wanted to yell, "See, Kakashi-sensei, I beat Gaara. Not Sasuke, but me." And yet it didn't seem to matter anymore. It just wasn't as important now that he had his godfather in his life. For some reason, knowing that someone wanted to be with him, was standing next to him, and was proud of him for no other reason than because it was Naruto who had accomplished the task, it made the praise of anyone else seem less meaningful. The medics arrived and began to take Gaara away for treatment before Naruto finally recognized his sensei and teammate were even there. Hello, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said with a tired wave as he walked past them toward the stairs to return to the balcony for the contestants. Jiraiya smiled as he placed a hand on his godson's shoulder and walked next to him, placing himself between his godson and Kakashi and Sasuke. Chapter 5. So when do I fight? Sasuke asked as he glared at the retreating back of his blonde teammate. You don't, Genma informed him. Sasuke turned his glare to the shinobi before him. I am here. I am the last Uchiha, and I will fight. Kakashi looked at Sasuke and sighed. Sasuke-kun, we were late and you were disqualified. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. Kakashi could tell immediately that Sasuke was about to explode and wisely placed a hand over his mouth before giving Genma an eye smile and disappearing with his charge in a puff of smoke. Kakashi and Sasuke reappeared in the stadium, sending Kakashi a death glare who finally realized he was still covering his student's mouth. Whoops, he said before removing his glove-covered hand. How dare you? I was supposed to fight Gaara. You told me I would fight Gaara. You should have seen the fight with Garrison, Madogai suddenly said as he appeared next to Kakashi. That statement caused both Kakashi and Sasuke's heads to snap straight to the spandex wearing Jonin. Taking a deep breath and accepting that he was about to open a can of youth-filled worms, Kakashi asked the question on both of their minds. Gaze on. What do you mean? It was a most youthful fight. The flames of youth of both Garrison and Naruto shined as if 1,000 suns were lit in the middle of the arena. Garrison's use of his sand was most impressive, but it was useless against Naruto's teleportation ability. It was as if the Yondaime had been reborn among us. He's disappear and reappear right where he needed to be. He acted as if he knew where everything were going before it got there. It was such an amazing vision of youth. Kakashi stared at the spandex wearing Jonin in shock for a moment before looking past Guy to Asuma Sarutobi, who grinned at the silver-haired man before decided to take pity on him. I won't lie, Kakashi-san, it was pretty incredible to watch. He used something like the Hiraishin. He just vanished in a flash of yellow light, and the next thing we see is his opponent flying into the wall. No one could follow him. He was teleporting Kakashi, just like the Yondaime. Kakashi stared at his fellow Jonin, trying to process the information he had just received. His student, Naruto Uzumaki, the dead last of the academy and village pariah, had somehow resurrected the technique that had made his sensei famous and allowed him to almost single-handedly defeat an entire enemy shinobi village. And I told him he needed to work on his chakra control. Naruto, what have you been hiding from us? Kakashi wondered to himself. As the adults spoke, the young Uchiha felt his pride take blow after blow. Why does Naruto get this power? I should have been given this ability to kill him. Sasuke felt a pain in his neck and moved his hand to the cursed mark that resided there, but despite the pain, he also felt the allure of his power. It was as if it was reminding him of the time in the forest, of the power it offered, the strength it could grant him if he chose to use it. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he watched them carry Gaara out of the arena in a stretcher, and his ears began to register the words being spoken around him. That was incredible. I bet he'll make Chunin with power like that. Do you think he's his son? What an amazing ability. I feel safer knowing the leaf has such power in it. Were we wrong about him all this time? It felt like dozens of conversations were taking place about his blonde-haired teammate. Conversations which should have been about him. He should have fought Gaara, and if he had, the entire village would be speak about his power, his clan, his Sharingan. With Naruto. Naruto smiled as Jiraiya told him how proud he was as they walked up the stairs. He could almost feel Sasuke's glare on his back, coupled with Kakashi's dumbfounded gaze. Naruto was still trying to sort his feeling out about everything. He had wanted his teacher's respect for so long. He wanted the man to pay attention to him the way he did Sasuke. But now that he had that attention, it just didn't feel important. Naruto still wanted the attention. He still wanted Kakashi to brag about him as his student, but then he'd feel his godfather's hand on his shoulder and the smile he had on his face. Everything Naruto could have ever asked for was right there next to him. Whenever Naruto looked into Jiraiya's face, there was just something special there, a love for him he had only imagined before. Jiraiya was proud of him. Whether he won or lost, he would still be proud, but more than that, Jiraiya loved him. Sure, he was still angry with Jiraiya for not being there for him when he was younger, and he still needed to sort his feelings out completely, but for the moment Naruto just basked in the glow of his godfather's presence. Well, kid, I need to get back to the old man. You rest up while you can. After you win this thing, we'll go out to the celebrate with all the ramen you can eat. Jiraiya told him with a big smile on his face. Naruto grinned up at him and grabbed the older man in a crushing hiss. You got it, godfather, he whispered into Jiraiya's coat. Jiraiya smiled and rubbed Naruto on the head tenderly before separating and returning to his old sensei. As Jiraiya returned to the Kage box, Orochimaru found himself at a crossroads. With Gaara eliminated, he doubted his forces would be able to actually destroy the village. And if Minato's son ever became truly involved in the fight, he could wipe out their entire attack for within moments. But it was obvious the Gaki couldn't control his power yet, and it was tiring him greatly. He needed to strike now, before the child got his power under control. He had no choice. As the stadium buzzed with anticipation of the upcoming final matches, they all noticed hundreds of feathers suddenly drifting down from the sky as a massive explosion rocked the Kage box. Chapter 6. Sensei. Jiraiya yelled as he watched the Kazekage jump from the box toward a nearby rooftop with the Toad Sage hot on his heels. It all happened far too quickly, and despite his skills, Jiraiya had been caught slightly off guard. He had never thought Suna would attempt to kidnap the Hokage in the midst of the Konoha. Rather than being focused on protecting his teacher's mind, had been working much too on the subject of his godson. Jiraiya cursed himself for letting his guard slip even for a moment as he landed seconds behind the Kazekage on the roof of the nearby administrative building. Just seconds were the difference between him standing with his sensei and watching a purple barrier raise between him and the now revealed Orochimaru. Now Jiraiya was stuck watching helplessly as his teacher was forced to fight alone against the man who had once been his best friend and teammate. Thousands of thoughts flew through his mind as he studied the purple barrier. Nothing physical could pass through it, and the only way to breach it would be an immensely powerful attack. Anyone attempting to break through with physical force would find themselves burned to ashes. But perhaps it could be bypassed instead. It was then Jiraiya had a thought. It was devious and would place in danger the person he cared for most in the world, but it could work. "Stay here. I'm getting help," he yelled to the nearby Yanbu before taking off back into the stadium. The Yanbu simply stared at the spot Jiraiya the Toad Sage had been a moment before. The only thought being, who the hell could one of the legendary three need to get help from? With Naruto. When the feathers began to fall, Naruto immediately looked around to see the stadium becoming a battlefield. It was so strange though, almost surreal. His mindscape kept up with every movement of the shinobi around him. He could feel their chakra all around him stretching out, growing fainter as the distance grew. But the strangest thing was watching the chakra that ran through everyone's bodies. The shinobi appeared as small miniature models in a three-dimensional landscape in his mind, overlaid with the world as his eyes saw it. He could tell which shinobi were about to use jutsu, and in what direction, and how powerful the attacks were just by glancing at it. It would be beautiful if it wasn't so deadly. Naruto groaned under the stress of his mind as it attempted to process the massive influx of data. He saw every battle, every move, as if they were small models in his mind. Placing a hand on his head, he tried to reconcile what his eyes saw in front of them and what his mind showed him. "Naruto," Jiraiya called as he landed beside his godson. He could tell Naruto was not entirely there and frowned in concern. As he placed a hand on his shoulder to shake him out of whatever stupor his godson was in before noticing his eyes seemed to glow slightly before dimming. Naruto shook his head and felt slightly dizzy from the experience. His headache began to fade quickly now that he was no longer attempting to process everything but what was in front of him. Looking up at the concerned face of Jiraiya. "Godfather, what's happened?" "We're being attacked, and I need your help." "Think you're up to it?" he told him without explanation. Naruto nodded before answering. "Yeah, I just had a bit of a headache from everything." Jiraiya nodded slowly. Remember when his father was first attempting the Hiroshin technique and said something very similar. Putting it to the back of his mind, he placed a hand on his godson, and the two vanished in a swirl of leaves before appearing before the barrier. In the short time they had left, Orochimaru had already summoned the first and second Hokages with the dreaded Edo Tensei and was engaging in obviously hard-pressed Hiruzen. Despite his age, the third Hokage showed why he was still revered by holding back his predecessors. It was an impressive battle, but one that was obviously a defensive action and quickly becoming a war of attrition and not in the third's favor. If it was just Orochimaru, Jiraiya was confident that even despite his age, the third would have been able to win, but against the summoned and indestructible forms of the first and second, there was almost no hope of victory for his teacher. It only served to cement his decision to seek his godson's help. "Old man," Naruto yelled as he rushed toward the barrier, only to be grabbed from behind and yanked back to safety by Jiraiya. "What the hell? We have to help him." Naruto turned an angry glare at his godfather. "And we will, but that barrier would turn you to a pile of ash if you touched it," he told him as Naruto's eyes widened, realizing how close he had come to causing his own death. "Listen, I remember your father once told me he had the ability to take things with him when he teleported. Can you use your bloodline to get inside and get Sensei and bring you both outside the barrier safely?" Naruto stopped for a moment when he realized how important a task this was. He was supposed to rescue the Hokage and bring him to safety. Seeing the grave look on his godfather's face caused Naruto to pause a moment to seriously consider how important this mission was. He was being charged with the rescue of the Hokage. He knew inside he had no choice but to agree. Naruto took a deep breath and felt in his mind for the trigger, and immediately his mind was filled with a 3D model, the surrounding area colored in grays and blues as his bloodline activated. Opening his eyes, he saw the barrier seemed to have no effect on the field, but he also felt his own chakra reserves were terribly low, despite the Kyuubi's work to replenish them. "I believe I can get past the barrier, but I don't know if I have the chakra to get us back out," he told Jiraiya honestly. Nodding, his godfather pressed a pill in his hand. "That's a soldier pill. It will replenish your chakra temporarily. Take it and get the Hokage out of there and to us. I'll be waiting to escort both of you back to a safe location." Naruto nodded as he popped the pill into his mouth and swallowed. Almost immediately, he felt his chakra reserves begin to fill and the previous exhaustion lift from his body. With his chakra restored, the blonde turned his attentions to the task at hand and focused on the third, who was currently engaged in a taijutsu battle with the second. Not knowing how he knew, but he aware that he would only get one chance at this, and it had to be timed perfectly. He needed an opening to get the third out of the barrier without the first, second, or Orochimaru interfering. Easier said than done. Orochimaru. The snake was grinned in anticipation as he watched his former teacher fight for his life against his precious mentors. It was thrilling to know that in mere minutes he would finally obtain his dream of ending the life of his sensei and destroying the village that had spurned his genius. He barely noticed that the buffoon of an ex-teammate had returned, although part of his mind did note the appearance of the QB brat. Orochimaru shrugged it off. His barrier should be more than enough to hold back both of them despite the appearance of the new bloodline. Confident in his victory, he focused his attention once more on the battle in front of him and savoring every moment of the fall of the third Hokage at his hands. Hiruzen. For a man pushing past 60, he could easily feel every old wound, ache, and pain he had ever experienced. Despite being in impressive shape for his age and reinforcing his body with chakra, Hiruzen knew he wasn't long for this world if something didn't change and quickly. The second was easier to fight than the first. As his former student, he knew his battle forms and attack patterns as well as his own. But together the Senju brothers were simply unstoppable, and his only plan was a delaying action. The second would engage while the first would attack him with a jutsu or ranged weapons, giving the second openings to take advantage of before swapping off and doing it again from a different direction. That they couldn't die and regenerated after his attacks was just icing on the cake that seemed to have his own funeral spelled out on it. But he was not done yet, and he refused to go down without a fight. Narrowing his eyes, he again dodged a number of Mokutan spikes as he backflipped, striking the second in the chin with a kick before throwing a number of shuriken at the first, who easily dodged. "Saru, you'll have to do better than that if you hope to defeat us," the second said. "Your student has done well to hold us off this long at his age, brother," the first spoke. Receiving a nod and a proud glance at the third Hokage, they made to resume their attack, only to blink as their opponent suddenly vanished in a flash of yellow light. Hiruzen would later describe that moment as what had to be the most surreal and out-of-body experience he had ever felt. One moment he was contemplating on summoning the Shinigami, and the next he saw a flash, felt a pair of hands latch onto him, and he became nothing. He was simply nothing. No feeling of his old body, no aches, no pains, just nothing. And then he felt everything again and found he knew he was no longer trapped inside the barrier. Blinking stupidly and shaking his head, he would later consider the experience as closest to death he had felt before. He heard the cry of rage from Orochimaru as he grinned up at the white hair of his last and most loyal student. "Get the Hokage to a secure location. I'll take my godson. You carry the Hokage. Make sure to have medical personnel available on arrival," Jiraiya ordered as he took the bundle that had collapsed next to Hiruzen in his arms. The old Kage only just now realizing what had happened. Naruto had saved him. He leaned against the Anbu who helped him leap away from the building as more troops swarmed the platform, waiting for Orochimaru to lower his barrier and launch a counterattack against the traitor. "He got me out, didn't he?" he asked quietly as the last of the newly installed cobwebs finally clearing out. Jiraiya nodded with a small, proud smile. "Yep, the kid managed to grab you and teleport you out to us. Now let's get you somewhere safe, sensei, and throw the snake and his friends out of our village." Hiruzen grinned and took off with his student and Anbu escort. They had a village to defend. Chapter 7. Disclaimer: I do not own Naruto. I do not derive profit, only joy from this work of fan fiction. The first thing Naruto's senses recognized was how quiet it was. He could hear loud noises in the distance, but he couldn't remember why. His entire body felt like it was ready to fall apart. Had he been crushed in a trash compactor at some point? Slowly his short-term memory engaged. He was fighting in the tournament, then met his godfather, and then Naruto's body moved on its own, pain rushing through him as he moved to a sitting position on some kind of cot as one word went through his mind. Invasion. He looked around, his vision clearing with a few blinks, and took stock of his surroundings. He was in some kind of command building. There were ENBU jumping in and out. The aged Hokage was to the side, but he did not see Jiraiya, which raised alarms in Naruto's head. Moving despite the protests of his body, Naruto forced himself off the cot and made his way into the room where the Hokage was discussing the counterattack with his ANBU commander. We've secured the east and south sections, and Jiraiya has moved to the north to deal with those snakes, so I want to focus our forces on retaking the western gate quickly before they have a chance to reinforce it, Hiruzen told the ANBU before him. Seeing the old man was safe and apparently unharmed, and hearing his newly found godfather was safe quieted enough of Naruto's initial panic to let him look around. He was in some kind of above-ground bunker. The walls were a dark gray, solid stone with what looked like reinforced iron running throughout them, and seals etched in every few feet. The tables and chairs were also made of a dark metal that cast no light, and the light of the room came from several dozen phosphorescent lamps lining the walls and ceiling. Shinobi of every rank moved quickly and with purpose inside the room on their tasks. The Hokage, in his black battle armor, was standing over a large stone table that held a model of the entire village in it with small models depicting various shinobi units and their locations. Naruto watched in wonder as he analyzed and made slight changes to control the tempo of the battle. Next to the Hokage stood an ANBU wearing a fox mask, denoting him the ANBU commander. While the village might fear and hate the Kyuubi no Yoko, they had to admit it was the most powerful creature anyone had ever encountered, and because of that it had become tradition among the ANBU that their commander always wore the visage of a fox with 9 red marks on the edges of the white mask. Hi, Hokage-sama. I also recommend we bring in ANBU units 4, 8, and 14 from the eastern section and move them to the section border here, and here, he said with emotion over a map of the village. Hiruzen nodded, and his trusted ANBU moved to carry out the order. I see you're awake much sooner than we anticipated. How are you feeling, Naruto-kun? The aged Kage asked. I'm okay. Where's Jiraiya, and what can I do? Naruto asked. Hiruzen smiled grimly, as his eyes never left the map of the village before him. He could feel the child's low chakra reserves and knew his body had been stressed beyond its ability. Yet a fierce pride came through the old man as his surrogate grandson, even running on fumes, wanted to help. Like many bloodlines, the body had to be honed to utilize it properly. It never worked that simply activating a bloodline would come without some cost. Even the Sharingan of the Uchiha was worthless when first activated. The Uchiha needed time to adapt to the changes and be capable of processing the information coming from their awakened eyes. That was why the Interceptor Fist style was so important to them. It allowed newly awakened Sharingans to function without the downside of having to retrain their bodies. Hiruzen had a medicine go over Naruto's body when they made to the forward command center. What she found was very interesting. The movement through whatever teleportation that Naruto used caused his body to undergo intense pressure. With time and training, it was likely that the side effect would deteriorate until it vanished completely, but on his young and unprepared body, it had caused extreme exhaustion and were similar to the opening of the first 3 of the 8 inner gates. It also made one other thing clear. His sensei had not been seeing to Naruto's training very well. His body was malnourished and had a distinct lack of muscular development for a shinobi his age. This was a conversation Hiruzen would be having with Kakashi very soon. Hiruzen pushed those thoughts to the back of his mind as he refocused on the map before him. Orochimaru. The Sound Four had never heard their leader curse so much or so violently. They had finally shaken off the last of the ANBU, but not without a cost. Taiyuya was captured, and Jirobo and Kidamaru were dead. All that remained were an injured Sakan and Yukon. Even Orochimaru had not escaped unscathed, as the numerous cuts, bruises, and various minor injuries paid mute testimony to. The 3 were standing outside the village walls watching the ongoing battle turned rout. It was obvious that Konoha was repulsing the attack, and, if their escape was anything to go by, doing so with far less casualties than expected. Apparently, the loss of the One Tail coupled with the survival and quick retrieval of the Hokage had solidified Konoha's command structure and added confidence to their ranks. Should we give the signal to withdraw Orochimaru-sama? Sakan asked quietly. Orochimaru leveled a glare at him. No, these pawns were worthless anyway. Let them fight to the death and do as much damage to Konoha as possible. We can always find more pawns and missing Ning. Sakan and Yukon nodded quickly in agreement before Yukon merged back with his brother. Come, we're done here. Konoha may survive, but Sasuke-kun will still be mine, Orochimaru stated as he began leaping from tree to tree in the direction of the land of rice. Naruto. Hiruzen had ordered Naruto to remain near him for the duration of the invasion and counterattack. Naruto wasn't thrilled about sitting out the invasion, but his body reminded him at every turn just why he was sitting out. Hiruzen had informed the blonde of both his body's condition and that his bloodline made him a high-priority target for capture. He instead instructed the blonde to watch how a battle was organized and led as a real-life learning experience. Thus, Naruto was currently observing the Hokage in a command combat situation for the first time. Naruto had to admit he was impressed, very impressed. He had not realized how much work it took and the little details the Hokage needed to pay attention to when commanding a battle. He put an emphasis not only on winning the battle, but doing it with few casualties and protecting vital assets to allow Konoha to recover quickly. He played the ebb and flow, the tempo of the battle itself, like a musician. It was obvious to the blonde why the enemy had attempted to take out the Hokage so quickly. Without him, there would be no head to command Konoha's forces. And with nearly 50 years of battle experience, including 2 shinobi world wars, the Hokage of Konoha was one of the most experienced battlefield commanders alive. Naruto watched as the aged Kage took complete control of the situation, directing both regular shinobi forces and ANBU to critical areas such as the hospital, water treatment facility, and Hokage Tower while watching and controlling the ebb and flow of the battle. Many times Naruto couldn't understand the reasoning when orders were first issued, but it all came together in one massive orchestrated plan. More than anything, Naruto saw how important the Hokage was to the village. ANBU, Jonin, Chunin, and Jinin gained new resolve when they heard their Hokage issue orders, as if his mere presence put them at ease and gave them strength and confidence. The Hokage was the village's spirit and inspiration. He was their living symbol of the will of fire. And Naruto, who had been told these things all his life, came to truly understand them in that moment. After several hours of watching the Hokage, Naruto was surprised to see the old man gesture for him to come to the table. Naruto-kun, I think you've watched enough from over there. The battle is nearing its completion. Only a few pockets of resistance remain, and the rest has already fled or surrendered. I want you to see something very important about being a Hokage, the old man told him. His voice was quiet, and as Naruto walked over, he couldn't help but notice how tired the old man looked. He pointed to several sections on the map and began explaining. These red flags indicate enemy shinobi inside the village. The larger the flag, the more shinobi, starting from squads of 4 moving up to battalions of 1,500. Each flag denotes positions indicated by security seals throughout the village and reports coming in from friendly forces. As you can see, green flags are friendly units, gray are captured, and black are dead. Naruto saw mostly green and gray with small occasional flags of red surrounded by green, but also many black flags of various sizes. He had no idea how many there were or what their numbers might be, but there were a lot of black flags. We lost nearly 1,500 shinobi today, Naruto-kun, Hiruzen told him quietly. It could have been much worse if Orochimaru had succeeded and killed me. While we have fail-safes in place should the Hokage die, with this kind of well-planned assault, the damage done before they kicked in would have been probably triple what we received. Nearly 7,000 enemy shinobi are dead, another 4,000 captured. Naruto's eyes widened at the huge discrepancy. But Gigi, how is possible we took so fewer casualties? I mean, I'm glad, but shouldn't we have been hit harder? Normally, yes, but 2 things helped us. One was that Orochimaru didn't actually train his troops. They were mostly missingnins, the majority of whom were not even above Genin or Chunin, and had no field command experience. They just attacked and went off on their own. Once we organized, we simply lured most of them to traps around a village and picked them off. he informed his surrogate grandson. Naruto nodded as he looked over the map, and Suna was counting on their hidden weapon. Suna only sent around 4,000 shinobi, about a third of their total force, to attack us while Orochimaru's people made up the rest. We were lucky. When Gaara didn't appear, Suna stalled and waited. Their hesitation gave us the time to organize and counter. If they had acted sooner, that alone would have doubled our losses. Naruto took several breaths as he tried to assimilate this knowledge while the old Kage continued. You'll have to perform this job someday too if you want to be Hokage Naruto-kun. Remember that you can't save everyone, and most of the time the Hokage needs to remain outside the battle to command. It's a hard lesson to learn, my boy. Hiruzen placed his hand on the young Uzumaki's shoulder and gave it a light squeeze of comfort. Naruto nodded quietly as he began to accept that his naivety about battle came crashing down around him. Chapter 8. The silence after a battle was always the worst. Going from the adrenaline-pumping action, war cries all around you, thunderous crashing of buildings being destroyed, and the raw energy in the air as jutsu were launched, to suddenly nothing always unnerved Jiraiya. It wasn't that this was unusual, it happened after every battle. Exhaustion took over no matter how hard someone trained, and eventually everyone had to rest. But the drastic change had always bothered the veteran shinobi. Even after all the years and wars, he still wasn't able to shake the feeling that some other shoe was waiting to drop, as if his own mistakes would come crashing down one day. Giving himself a small but determined grin, Jiraiya took a sip from the hot tea on the table as he reached for the next report in the growing pile nearby. Jiraiya arrived sometime near midnight to take over for his sensei. It didn't take a genius to realize the Hokage was old and tired. While he might be a good paper pusher during peace, war was a young man's game, and it drove home how much he ignored the signs that his sensei needed him. He knew the Hokage would never ask him to take over again after he refused the first time, but in the back of his mind Jiraiya knew that Hiruzen had always hoped he would step up and offer. Jiraiya nodded quietly to himself as he glanced over to his godson, sleeping in a chair, and his sensei, trying to catch a few hours on a cot next to him. Naruto remained with the Hokage the rest of the evening and throughout the night. With the sudden revelation of both his bloodline and the potential for enemy shinobi to connect the dots about his heritage, the Hokage was unwilling to risk letting him leave. Add in the QB sealed inside him, and with his lack of training and exhaustion, he was just too high a priority to risk in the chaos of the invasion. Even now, while Konoha may have repulsed the invaders with relatively light losses, security was still in question. Currently, squads were combing the streets for time-delayed traps, improvised explosive devices, bugs, and all manner of espionage the enemy might have set up during the invasion. Jiraiya looked over another report from the western district of the village. Apparently, the clans had repulsed the attacks early and none of the compounds were breached. Although there was still some question as to the Uchiha district since no one was currently living there. He made a note to have an AMBU team thoroughly check the district. Sighing to himself, he stared at the steaming mug of tea near his hand on the desk. It was his sole companion at this late hour as he took out the next report before glancing over it and making several marks and notes for Hiruzen to review later. For the moment, everything was quiet though, and Jiraiya allowed his mind to wander. Jiraiya sighed again as he took another sip of his tea, his mind rerunning the battle as he pieced together everything from the mission reports. He could see the enemy movements in his mind, decisions being made as both allies and enemies fought. It was always a little unsettling how he could guess why one unit went one direction or why one group of shinobi stood and fought when they should have retreated. Tactics had always been a game he enjoyed, sometimes too much. Everyone always thought Orochimaru was the genius of the three, but he was the best frontline fighter and scientist. It had been Jiraiya to come up with strategy. He turned his attention to the roster of dead from his home, and, while thankful it was so few, couldn't help but internally cringe at what may have happened had Naruto not been able to retrieve the Hokage. It was only Hiruzen's battle experience that saved many lives during the invasion. Jiraiya felt confident that he could have directed the battle just as well as his sensei, but if Naruto's bloodline hadn't appeared, he would likely have been off fighting in the midst of everything rather than checking in at the command center. It was a mistake, and one he realized could have cost thousands their lives if things had turned out different. With another glance at his godson and sensei sleeping nearby, he took another sip of tea and came to a decision. "I've been allowed to play the fool far longer than most, I suppose," he said quietly to himself as he sipped the cup of tea. And as the night dragged on, the white-haired hermit made a new promise to himself and those who were precious to him. He would stay this time and give his life to protect those he loved. Several days later, Sasuke growled to himself as he heard the villagers talk non-stop about Naruto, the dead last that had stolen his place in the tournament. They should be talking about him, not that blonde-haired idiot. His Sharingan was the most powerful bloodline. He was the last Uchiha. He glanced at his companions as they walked toward the Hokage Tower to do whatever drank rebuilding mission they'd received that morning. Another waste of time he should have been using to become stronger. Sasuke's glare intensified as he glanced at his companions. The tall silver-haired man and pink-haired girl were walking quietly and yawning respectively. As Team 7 entered the operation room to retrieve their mission for the day, they were met with the same sight they had been treated to every day since the invasion. Sasuke's blood boiled further at the sight of the blonde who had stolen his spotlight, standing near the Hokage. Naruto, not having noticed his old team enter the room, nodded to whatever he was told and created a clone that immediately left, running out a side door. Naruto had remained near Jiraiya after the battle. No one could be sure that spies had not infiltrated the village and hidden themselves among the populace. Since Sasuke spent his time with Kakashi, he was considered safe, but the Hokage had not wanted to place two high-profile targets in the care of a single shinobi, no matter how powerful, so instead chose to grant Jiraiya's request for apprenticeship. It made sense, as the Naruto would be taking up residence with his godfather once Jiraiya got around to finally cleaning up his family home. For the moment, though, they were both staying at Naruto's small apartment. The knowledge that Naruto was Jiraiya's apprentice had spread like wildfire in Konoha's rumor mill. The village couldn't help but talk about it after the display at the tournament and his rescue of the Hokage. The villagers, busy with repairs, still were not sure how to take the revelations they had been subjected to. The shinobi had simply nodded, and many withdrawn in shame while focusing on missions. They had either turned an apathetic eye or ignored the boy completely, while allowing the villagers to do as they wished. They had ignored the son of their leader in favor of not getting involved. Omission and inaction, in their eyes, was as bad as overt action itself. Their sense of honor was greatly damaged by this. The man had given his life for them, led them during the Third Shinobi War, and saved many a veteran shinobi life. And they had repaid him with apathy for his son. The civilians were split. One side wanted to ignore what was before their noses, while the other wanted to rush and apologize. While never overtly attempting to harm Naruto, other than the occasional drunk who would try and break in his apartment, they had overcharged him, treated him like a social pariah, ignored his existence, and all around shunned him. The sides seeking to remain in ignorance grew smaller with each day as word of what Naruto had done during the invasion and tournament spread. The fact that Jiraiya had taken him as his apprentice and publicly claimed him as his godson only further cemented the obvious in their minds. The civilians moved about slightly subdued and always talking about him as they rebuilt. And therein lay the crux of Sasuke's anger. His teammate had stolen, in his mind, his rightful place. Ever since his clan had been wiped out, he had been the star of the village. Everyone watching and talking about him. And while he had never cared much about it, now that it was gone, he found himself becoming quickly jealous of the one who had taken his place. He should have been the one offered apprenticeship to a Sannin. He should be the talk of the village. He was the last Uchiha. Sasuke leveled a glare at his blonde former teammate as they received a mission from the Hokage. "Kakashikin, take your team to clear rubble in Sector 11 near the warehouse district. Be careful. We think there may be a few unexploded traps in the area," Hiruzen told him. With a nod, Kakashi took the mission scroll and was turning around when a piercing voice came from his pink-haired student rang out. "Isn't Naruto coming? He's been gone for days and does nothing but lounge in here. He should be working like the rest of us." Sakura finished his statement/question with her hands on his hips and a glare at the blonde near the Hokage. Naruto wilted visibly at the obvious anger from Sasuke and Sakura. He lowered his head slightly at the glares of his two former teammates, feeling the hate they seemed to exude. Naruto started before the Hokage raised a hand to silence him. Hiruzen knew Naruto felt bad for not being out with his former teammates, despite their attitudes toward him, and he would not let this girl make him feel worse. Hiruzen gave the Chunin a level gaze, causing both to glance down at the floor before deciding to answer. Naruto is here aiding me personally. His ability to make hundreds of shadow clones as runners to relay information has allowed nearly 200 shinobi to focus on rebuilding and clearing rubble that normally would be relaying those messages. He is by no means lounging, and you have no place to question my decisions, Chunin. Are we clear? Hiruzen's question was obviously rhetorical and was spoken with a slight chill to his tone. While he might have a soft spot for the next generation, it was because of the naivety they had before entering the real world. But after that, once they were bloodied, normally they understood the need for the chain of command. No Chunin that had seen true combat should have questioned the Hokage like that. Sakura, obviously, hadn't gotten that memo, and from the slight wince from Kakashi, he understood that that would need to be rectified. Sasuke narrowed his eyes as dark thoughts went through his head, and his jealousy spiked again. Naruto, the dead last who had no special skills, was more useful to the Hokage than the last Uchiha. He would have to rectify that and ensure the blonde was returned to his rightful place. Sasuke began to grin inside as he made a note to have dinner with a few prominent civilians and elders over the next few days. Chapter 9. Naruto sighed as he hit the floor. Even with his absurd levels of stamina and chakra, the Hokage had been a slave driver. It had been almost 2 weeks since the day Sakura had spoken to the Hokage about his lounging about the mission room, and Naruto had redoubled his efforts to prove himself useful. He had assured his grandfather figure that he would be all right, and began producing even more clones to help with repairs throughout the village, as well as the normal messenger duties. While he knew his chakra would replenish itself by morning, but it always left him beat afterwards. He turned at the noise coming from the small kitchen nearby. Jiraiya walked out and grinned at him before offering him a bowl of ramen. Enjoy it. I added plenty of veggies and meats to help replenish your chakra, the white-haired Chunin told him. I didn't know you knew how to make ramen Arakyufu. Naruto said he began to devour the food before him. Jiraiya grinned. Who do you think introduced your dad to ramen? The fact that your mom was obsessed with the stuff only helped when he made her my special family recipe, he told him. Naruto smiled while continuing to slurp down the noodles. He loved this time of evening with Jiraiya. Every day, they went to the mission room together where Jiraiya would help Hiruzen with planning and the day-to-day rebuilding efforts. Naruto would provide support, and Hiruzen would oversee everything. Afterwards, they would come home, eat, and he would tell him about his parents. The two would often talk well into the night before crashing on either the couch or the bed, depending on how tired they were. Neither knew what the next day would bring nor the headache it would cause. The next morning, they moved toward the Hokage Tower and took stock of the village around them. Much of the village had been repaired already and was back in working order. Normally, it would have taken longer, but with Naruto's clones providing extra manual labor and freeing up several hundred shinobi usually used as messengers, repairs had sped along at a rapid pace. As the duo entered the tower, an Anbu appeared before them, handing Jiraiya a message. The older man frowned as he read it. Is this happening now? The Anbu nodded. Okay, we'll be there in a moment. The Anbu vanished as Naruto looked from one to the other before his curiosity finally got the better of him. What's that, Arakyufu? This, my boy, is a message, Jiraiya proclaimed loudly as he brandished the note to his apprentice and godson before continuing forward into the building. Naruto nearly fell down as he hurriedly followed the older man. That's not what I meant. Jiraiya chuckled. It's a summons for us to meet Sensei at the council chambers. Apparently, some emergency council has been summoned by the elders. They normally don't bother, but we knew that would likely happen soon. I'm surprised it hasn't happened before now, actually. Naruto nodded. And why would they want me there? Jiraiya looked down at him as they walked toward the room and raised an eyebrow. Because the meeting is most likely about you and your now revealed bloodline. Many on the Shinobi and Civilian Council will likely want to try and get on your good side as the heir to both the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans. Not to mention your Kekii Genkai appearing. No one, not even my teammate Tsunade, knows for sure how they come about, and yours is particularly powerful. Believe me, this was going to happen no matter what, but we've prepared for it. Just trust me and stay quiet, Kay." Naruto nodded. "All right, Arikufu. I trust you and Gigi to handle it." Jiraiya winked at him and continued to ignore the Arikufu title. While it annoyed him a little, he felt it was more than he deserved for the horrible years he had spent away from his godson. The fact he was willing to give him the title at all meant the world to the white-haired Chunin. The duo walked in silence as they arrived at the doors to the council chamber. The chamber was a long rectangular room with 3 tables inside. One table at the end of the room rested on raised landing where the Hokage and advisors sat. The other 2 spread from the Hokage on the floor toward the doorway, lengthwise leaving room between them. One onside the Shinobi Council sat consisting of the clan heads of the great clans of Konoha, and on the other the Civilian Council that consisted of the wealthiest and most influential civilians of Konoha. Between the 2 shinobi and civilians, and placed before the Hokage, was another smaller table and chair that petitioners could sit at. However, Jiraiya ignored that as he and Naruto walked forward, the older man yawning. "Isn't it too early for politics?" he asked. Hiruzen allowed a slight smile at his student's obvious lack of concern. "I am in complete agreement, Jiraiya-kun. Now will you reveal whatever mystery reason you have for requesting this meeting, Danzo?" To Hiruzen's side, a man wrapped in bandages with a small tuft of black hair and holding a cane stepped forward with a frown. "I think it would be obvious, Hiruzen. We had a potentially new and powerful Kekkei Genkai appear. I think we all want to know where it came from and why we're not informed that the Yondaime had an heir." Hiruzen shrugged, knowing the cat was out of the bag. That should be obvious. The number of enemies Minato accumulated in his life would transfer to his son. The assassins he would deal with would have been more than the village was capable of defending against. Anonymity was his best defense. "So he really is Minato's pup?" Sum, the Inuzuka clan had asked. "Yes, he was my father," Naruto said proudly. Several civilians frowned. "Are we sure of this?" The boy could be making it up and taking advantage of the situation to gain more fame than should be granted, one of the civilians stated. Jiraiya chuckled at that. Other than being a mini-clone of Minato with what is obviously Uzumaki bone structure? Yeah, Tsunade did the blood tests herself and confirmed it a few days after he was born. He's Kushina's and Minato's son, all right. Hiruzen raised an eyebrow at this. Not even he had been aware that Jiraiya had sought out Tsunade to perform the blood work for Naruto. He only knew that Jiraiya had someone he trusted perform the tests. And what of his new ability? Is it a Kekkei Genkai? And is it transferable to any children he has? Inoichi of the Yamanaka clan asked. Yes, that was confirmed at the tournament, although it was a previously unknown one. We won't know if his children will receive it until he has them, though. You know that. Jiraiya told him while Naruto blushed and rubbed his neck as the mention of him having kids. Then we must enact the Clan Restoration Act immediately. Imagine an army of teleporting shinobi. We would never be challenged by another village ever again. Another civilian cried out before being silenced by the glares of the Shinobi Council. I'm afraid that is impossible. The bylaws of the Namikaze and the alliance with the Uzumaki clan prohibit such an action by the council, Hiruzen explained. For us to do so would break the ties of both clans with the village. Danzo frowned at this and nodded. He knew that many clans had such bylaws to stop the village from becoming too involved in their affairs, thus why Sasuke was allowed to roam free without being tied down by any marriage contracts to force his rebuilding of the Uchiha clan. If that is everything we have work to do, Jiraiya began. Actually, Uchiha-sama spoke with me recently over dinner. He expressed his concern that his clan was not being given the proper respect it deserved, something I agree with. I'd like to know why you did not take Uchiha-sama as your apprentice, Jirizuma, another civilian counselor asked while other nodded along. Who I take as my apprentice is none of your concern. Am I clear? Jiraiya said, his voice cold as ice. Danzo smirked slightly under his bandages. So the Uchiha isn't happy that the Uzumaki Namikaze is receiving higher-level training. I agree. Jiryazan has the right to apprentice any who he wishes. The council has no reason or right to understand why. Danzo said as Hiruzen raised an eyebrow wondering what his old rival was up to. Danzo smirked inwardly at this new information. I can use this to attract the boy to me. Training with my forces would provide the perfect way to gain from him what may be denied through the Uzumaki Namikaze. That is correct. Now I believe we have exhausted the purpose of this emergency session, Hiruzen said. His contempt for the waste of time, he felt this meeting has been obviously in his voice. There is one more thing, Hokage-sama, Koharu said quietly. It has to do with young Naruto and his status as heir to both the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans. As heir to both, he will be unable to merge the clans. The bylaws of the great clans makes that very clear. He will need to choose one or the other to represent in the village. Hiruzen smiled. And should he do so, the remaining clan will then have its assets absorbed by the village. But you forget one thing, Koharu. The Uzumaki were never a clan of our village. Therefore, those rules do not apply. Naruto-kun merely need take a second wife under the Uzumaki name to restore the clan. And even that decision need not be made until he turns 16 after all. It is much too early for us to bring up such a thing. Koharu frowned and nodded to the Hokage while Naruto's eyes grew to the size of saucers as Jiraiya grinned, already knowing where he would find inspiration for his next book from. Danzo nodded, already expecting the result. Before we dismiss, I would like to renew my petition to have the boy turned over to me for personal training. That is already taken care of, as Naruto is officially my apprentice, Jiraiya responded. I understand, but you are often gone from the village for long periods of time. It would be best if he had someone here to continue his training, perhaps when you are unable to? Danzo said. I had intended to tell you after my replacement arrives, but I have chosen to retire to the village to take care of my godson and his training more directly, Jiraiya told him. Danzo frowned at this. But your spy network will suffer greatly from your lack of attention, Jiraiya, and we do not know any replacement who would be capable of running your network at your level of competency. Should we lose your spy network, it could prove disastrous to Konoha. Jiraiya shrugged. I have already contacted my chosen successor, and he will be here any day now to receive instructions. I have worked with him the past few years with the intention of turning my network over to him. Again, Danzo frowned, having never known that Jiraiya had a successor to his spy network. And who would this be? Why, Itachi Uchiha, of course, Jiraiya told him with a grin. Chapter 10. Sunagakure no Soto. While Konoha's council was quickly descending into madness over the thought of Itachi taking over Jiraiya's spy network, the Suna Council was trying to determine how best to play off the death of their yondaime and subsequently being duped into attacking their allies. I don't know what you're worried about. The third Hokage has always been soft. He will happily reinstate our prior alliance to avoid a war. I don't think we have any cause for concern, one of the counselors said. We have already offered reparations, but any alliance will be on shaky ground after what we've done. The Hokage won't be willing to bend even a little, not with the public pressure he will be under. If he doesn't treat us with a heavy hand, the rest of the villages will view him as weak, and he can't afford that any more than we can. We need to make a much greater gesture. And the simple fact is we can't afford a misstep right now, one of the counselors said. With the losses during the invasion and our failure to discover the yondaime had been slain, we will be seen as weak and vulnerable by both major and minor powers. With our already low number of shinobi from the economic issues we've been dealing with coupled with the losses from the failed invasion, if multiple minor villages were to ally against us, we would be hard-pressed to hold them back, Baki said. The Suna Council murmured at the news they could be in such a dire position. And with the Uzumaki child's sudden power, Konoha's strength has only increased. It was like an advanced form of the Hiraishin the yellow flash used. I believe we must make a greater gesture to ensure Konoha accepts our overtures. With our alliance reinstated, we'll gain much-needed breathing room. Agreed. The Uzumaki child's power is great enough to provide a massive deterrent to any village in the world. Look at what he did to Gaara. I suggest we offer something that could cement the alliance over a much longer term. Another counselor agreed. Baki, the interim Kazekage, frowned at where this was going. You mean to offer a marriage contract to cement the alliance? Exactly. If we offer one of our most promising kunoichi from a strong line, it would show our willingness to make amends and build a stronger foundation for the future. I think Tamarazen would be perfect for this situation. She's the daughter of the former Kazakage and a member of one of our more prestigious clans. The council member said, receiving several nods and murmurs of accent. Baki frowned further. And we lose one of our most promising young kunoichi in the process. And who would you offer her to? Her father is dead, her brothers protect her now, and any decision made would have to pass through Gaara. Despite his obvious improvements, he is unlikely to be inclined to give up his sister for this council's politicking. Since his return, Gaara had been different. He was less homicidal and more in control. He didn't radiate the bloodlust he once did, and he seemed more introspective of his actions than ever before. However, despite that, he was still Gaara, and many feared his willingness to slaughter indiscriminately without the power of their former Kage to control him. Some counselors frowned at that while others nodded. The original speaker, seeing the spilt decision, decided to try another tact. What if we ask her? She may not be against it if she understands the situation and our concerns. We may even be able to offer her a choice of whom to offer the contract to. It doesn't have to be someone she dislikes. It could be someone she respects and is agreeable to. Seeing he had caught the attention of many of the council with the idea, Baki knew he was outmaneuvered and nodded his assent before sending an ANBU to retrieve his former student. Konoha. After the prolonged council session and Naruto had disappeared to the one place he felt could make all the evils of the world go away. The sun seemed to set on the small ramen stand that had often fed him when no one else would. It was his haven, and the father and daughter that treated him as a family always seemed to keep the worst of the world away, even if only for a short time. So what's got my number one customer down? A female voice asked with concern at the obviously distraught blonde before her. Her name was Ayam, and she had known the boy before her since he was 5 years old. She was a few years older than him, around 5 feet 4 inches, with deep brown hair and eyes that radiated warmth of the boy sitting before her. Naruto gave her a weak grin before sighing. Sorry, Ayamekin. I had to attend this stupid council meeting, and things they were pretty terrible. I hate politics. Ayam frowned. Yeah, Dad is always complaining about the council and the stupid things they do. What happened? The concern obvious in her voice. Naruto took another bite of his ramen and squeezed the chopsticks tightly. I just don't understand why those old bakas have to be involved in my life. Jiraiya says it's the downside to becoming a leader. You deal with people wanting to play political games, and why he never wanted to be Hokage. But, I mean, just a month ago I had no idea who my parents were. I was some orphan, and now I am some highly valuable asset, and the heir to 2 clans that I never knew existed. And they just want me to make some mistake so they can steal my clan's money and heritage for the village. Naruto squeezed his eyes shut as tears threatened to force their way out. Why can't they leave my family alone and let me figure this out by myself? Didn't we sacrifice enough? He said quietly as his left hand moved slightly to cover his stomach before he returned to his ramen. He had learned a lot about his family in the past few weeks, their sacrifices during the Great Shinobi Wars, and to see Konoha attempting to maneuver to steal from them just filled him a deep sense of betrayal by the village. Ayam smiled sadly at the boy in front of her. She reached over and rubbed his sun-kissed hair with a small smile. I wish I had the answers for you, Naruto-kun, but sadly neither Dad nor I have any influence in the council. We've never been their fans, but we do care for you. And if they try and take anything that belongs to you, then I want you to fight them with every ounce of you being. Got it? Naruto met her eyes and nodded before giving her a rare, true smile. You got it. Ayam smiled and looked the blonde in the eye, admiring the determination and spirit. Naruto-kun, you'll always be family to us. I know we're not blood, but Dad and I will always be here for you. I'm just sorry we can't do something more to help, but make ramen for you. Naruto gave her a smile. I know, Ayamekin, but the ramen you make has saved me every time I need it. Thank you. You guys are the best, and thanks for listening to me. Ayam smiled and nodded before turning to take some dishes to the back. Sometimes everyone needed a little bit of ramen in their life. Hokage Tower. Telling them that Itachi is coming could blow up in our face. You know that, right? The old Kage said as smoke drifted lazily from his pipe. Although it was brilliant to treat it as if we had recruited him back to the village. No one even questioned it. and it split them between the fear of his return and the much-needed improvement to the village he would bring as ensranced shinobi. The council meeting had descended into screaming and madness after Jiraiya's announcement. The good part was it threw everyone off Naruto and forced them to focus on a different subject. It was a temporary solution, but it bought them time to stall the council from trying any dirty tricks with Naruto's heritage. Jiraiya nodded. I know, but we needed some way to get them off Naruto, and bringing Itachi back is our safest bet. Also, since he will be out of the village, we won't have to worry about villagers going nuts over it, particularly now that you've made it an S-class secret. No one will know that Itachi is our spy, and he has been brought back into Konoha. The sage snorted. Not that he ever left. The return of Itachi would cause a massive stir if it got out, not to mention the effect it would have on Sasuke's already questionable mindset. The reports from the Yamanaka clansmen that had been tasked with following and putting together a preliminary report on his mental state indicated he should be immediately removed from the shinobi corps and put down as a flight risk. Should he learn his brother was returning, he would likely be unable to accept it, going so far as to cause a possible mental breakdown. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed. So you know? Of course, I'm a spy master. I knew before you did what happened and why. The Uchiha were planning a coup, and Itachi was the only one capable of stopping them. Although we both know Na and someone else were involved, Itachi only killed active-duty shinobi taking part in the coup. I have all the evidence, even if it took years to get it. The third Hokage nodded. Then we're ready to take the final step. To think if I had died in the invasion, we never would have been able to take him down. Jiraiya noticed his teacher's mood dampening and turning toward unproductive thoughts. But you didn't, and we are here. Say the word, and I'll lead the team myself to arrest the old bastard. Hiruzen was silent for several long minutes, contemplating the plan. He knew that Danzo had not disbanded in the way he had been ordered. Unfortunately, it had taken nearly 6 years to gather the evidence. He had been forced to play his cards close to his chest, let Danzo think he was getting away with building his own private army, in order to get him to come out enough for Jiraiya to gather that knowledge. But he also knew Danzo's little group provided protection for Konoha by doing missions that couldn't be traced back to the village. That was a moot point now, though. He was growing too dangerous, and the new numbers showed he had several hundred operatives, small compared to nearly 25,000 shinobi under the Hokage's command, but still, he could not allow it to continue. Hiruzen nodded and Jiraiya vanished to the ANBU command center to initiate the counterstrike. As Jiraiya left, Hiruzen knew he needed to take care of one more loose end before it could possibly grow out of his control. Lizard. Monkey. I want to retrieve Sasuke Uchiha for me. Suna. Temari sat quietly with her brothers. The council had called her in that morning and requested she agreed to a marriage contract to ensure Konoha accept their renewed alliance. She had been struck silent by the audacity of the request. Well, more like demand. Only Gaara's presence had ensured it was a politely phrased as a request and not an outright order. After giving the council the proper response that she would consider their request, she had left and headed into the sand dune training grounds near the village to unleash mass destruction. Hours later, she still felt nothing but rage at what they wanted. Her red-headed little brother sat nearby reading a book, poetry from what she saw. He had taken to read that at night. He said it helped him feel at peace. She finally had him back, and the council would be damned before she agreed to leave. Just as she was making up her mind, her old sensei let himself into their home. What do you want? Baki raised an eyebrow and accepted her anger. I want you to know the marriage contract was not my idea, but you should be aware of the situation we are in. I know you were too angry to even hear what anyone was saying. Temari nodded with a glare at her old sensei. We need this alliance, Temari. While I don't think it's necessary, it would not hurt for us to offer the contract, and there is no indication Konoha would accept. Even before the invasion, we had the lowest standing shinobi force of the 5 great nations. Now there is legitimate concern that without this alliance, several smaller villages could ally against us and win, or if another of the major villages wanted to launch an attack, we would be hard-pressed to repel them. Most likely in either scenario, we would lose. Temari's eyes widened. She knew things weren't good, but had no idea they were that bad. But if things are so bad, why offer the contract? We're paying reparations, right? Shouldn't that be enough? Normally, yes, but you saw what the Uzumaki boy was capable of. The council feels, and I can't deny, that with his power alone backing us, any nation would think twice before launching an attack. Gaara, who had remained nearby, raised his eyes from the book in his hands. Uzumaki is a good man. I approve of him, he said in a neutral tone before turning his eyes to his sister. But should you be harmed in any way, I will kill him for you. Temari stared at her brother, both in pronouncement that he would approve of the Uzumaki and his statement he would kill for her. To protect her. He had never killed for anyone but himself before. Just the thought that he cared for her, that her baby brother cared for her, was enough to bring her to tears that she may have to leave him just as he was returning to her. We had not decided who to offer the contract to. Part of bringing you into the meeting was to get an idea if you would be willing or if there was anyone you may consider marrying within the Leaf, Baki told her. Temari frowned at that. She knew the council lacked the power to order her to accept the marriage contract. As a clan member, she was protected under clan law from that, although her clan head could make such arrangements. And you came to let me know the stakes if I say no and how it could affect the entire village? She asked with a hint of anger in her voice. Baki nodded. You needed to know the full picture. I don't deny that I dislike it, but there is a strong argument that should we offer the contract, it will sway Konoha to accept that our intentions are genuine. Temari stared at the dunes before her in thought. Sometimes it just sucked being a shinobi. Chapter 11. Unknown location. A small crow sat astride the shoulder of an older teen as he read over the missive he had just received. Without showing any emotion on his neutral face or within his onyx eyes, the black-haired youth nodded to himself before setting fire to the paper and allowing it to burn to ash. He looked at his partner, who glanced at him curiously since Itachi rarely received any mail through his summons, and when he did it was usually from an intelligence contact. Itachi considered his options. He could simply kill the blue-skinned man, but the probability he would win against Kisame was likely 50-50. The two were both powerful strength shinobi, and as much as Itachi hated to admit they were polar opposites, and he was as likely to win as Kisame was in a fight. With this in mind, Itachi decided another tactic was required. I have been recalled to Konoha. Kisame raised an eyebrow and grinned at the straightforward statement. Oh, and I suppose that means you've got to kill me, huh? He said as he reached for the massive sword on his back. Not necessarily. We both know we each have an equal chance of winning in a fight, and there is a second option available. You come with me and remain my partner, he responded. Kisame's eyes widened at the thought for a moment before threw his head back and began laughing at the idea. Damn Itachikin, that's a bold move even for you. After he quieted down, Kisame got down to truly considering the offer. His hand slipped from the handle to the palm of his sword as he considered the offer. And what would I get out of it? Itachi knew this was the make-or-break-it point. You would get to fight powerful enemies, and should war come, slaughter hundreds of shinobi, all the while having the tacit backing of Konoha without any restrictions other than to avoid killing Konoha shinobi. Although injuring those attacking you would be acceptable. Further, you would eventually be able to fight the other members of the Akatsuki, powerful opponents in their own right, whereas now you are forced to work with them. Also, strength mission pay at regular intervals. You know just what to say to a guy at Itachikin, the blue-skinned man said as he removed his hand from his sword. To Kisame, he got to continue doing exactly what he was already doing plus pay plus. When war broke out, he would have one of the big five backing everything he had done. He got money, good fights, and wouldn't have to worry about Hunter Neen anymore. It was all a win-win in his book, so why turn it down? Besides, he could always go back on the deal in the future he felt like it. With a slight nod, Itachi began his trek back to his old home with the blue-skinned shark beside him. Konoha. Hokage's office. Uchiha Sasuke, rank Genin, tenure 6 months. Preliminary psychiatric report indicates obsession with older brother Uchiha Itachi and idolization of father Uchiha Fugaku. Condition: mental instability causes subject to react without reason to specific triggers. If left untreated, subject will be unable to determine friend from foe and likely attack any who obstruct him from his perceived goal. Further, subject should be considered a flight risk. Subject has exhibited signs of willingness to do anything, including flight from the village, to obtain power to accomplish his perceived goals. Likely even if goals are achieved, a new obsession will take place of the old, and the cycle will continue. Recommendation. Due to Uchiha Sasuke's value to the village, he should have his chakra permanently sealed. 24-hour ENBU guard and immediate emergency clan restoration protocols enacted. Hiruzen finished reading the summary of the report to the black-haired teen sitting before him. The anger rising from the boy was palpable and growing. It was obvious he hated what he had just been told about his own mental state and further refused to accept it without being pushed. He winced from the pain coming from his curse mark as he glared at the Hokage and his Sharingan activating unconsciously. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes as Sasuke felt pain erupt from between his eyes before realizing the Hokage had thrown a paperclip without even seeing him move. Do not even activate those eyes in my presence. Is that understood, Yukihazen? The cold fury at the action by the boy bled over to his voice, and the immense pressure from his power made Sasuke realize blink before stopping the flow of chakra to his eyes. Despite this, he continued to glare at the old man before rising from the chair in an indignant huff. What is this nonsense, and when was it prepared? I am sure whoever did it had an old grudge against my clan and is using this opportunity to have me removed just from spite. I want whoever would make sure baseless claims arrested at once. Do not think you can order me, Genin. I am the Hokage. You are my shinobi. You do as I say. He spoke calmly as he released a portion of his killer intent, causing the young Uchiha's eye to widen before resuming his seat. While Sasuke had been witness to killer intent from potential Kage-level shinobi, he had never had it focused singularly on him and caused his instincts to scream at him. They told me he was in the presence of an apex predator and to do nothing to anger him. This report is accurate. What has been discovered is that your previous evaluators were being bribed to give you clean records. Had we caught this previously, you would have received proper treatment, and none of this would be an issue. I have had those traitors executed for putting the village at risk. I take this issue extremely seriously and will not allow anyone to affect the combat capabilities of shinobi under my command. The reason you are here is because you have two options, and I am being kind enough to give you a choice. That is all. The old Kage told the child before him, who continued to glare at being spoken down to before nodding that he understood. First, you go on a 6-month probationary period. You will be restricted to the village with Kakashi as your teacher and guard. You will have a 24-hour Yenbyu guard on you at all times. Your chakra and Sharingan will be sealed during this period. A flight risk seal will be placed on your body. Should you try and leave the village, it will knock you unconscious, and if someone should try and continue to take you, it will stop your heart, killing you. You will attend sessions with a trained mind healer for however long they require. Should you cooperate and your therapist indicate you have made significant strides, you will be removed from probationary status and allowed to resume Genin operations with a new team, again under your current sensei. Hiruzen waited a moment to let these thoughts settle into the young boy's mind before continuing. Your second option is removal from the shinobi corps, your chakra and Sharingan permanently sealed, and activation of the emergency clan restoration protocols. This means the village will choose 4 voluntary women who have the highest compatible genetic matches with yours. They will be impregnated using artificial insemination. On paper, each woman will take the Uchiha clan name as your wife. This will continue until we have 4 male Uchiha heirs aside from yourself. Any females born will also take the Uchiha name, and any men marrying them will be required to take the Uchiha name. You will have no interaction with the women or children. Sasuke glared hatefully, even as he felt the cursed seal on his neck begin to heat up. He knew his anger was agitating the seal, and he could feel the tainted pull of its chakra even as he accepted it fully. He didn't care that it came from a traitor, only that it made him feel stronger, and at that moment he wanted to do nothing more than destroy the old man before him. Sasuke continued his glare at the old man before him as he dictated terms to the last Uchiha before he sneered. You can't do that. My clan's bylaws and agreement with the village ensure it. Normally, yes, but because you are the last loyal Uchiha, emergency protocols take effect, agreed to by all clans of the village. Since you are a flight risk and have major mental instability issues, the village has the right to enact these protocols to ensure the loyalty of the Uchiha clan for the future safety of Konoha. Sasuke sat there seething as he weighed his options. his mind unable to process what he was being told. He would be unable to kill Itachi? His Sharingan would be sealed? His power revoked? No, his mind wouldn't accept it. His hands clenched and unclenched as he closed his eyes in an attempt to accept and resolve the situation. The small voice that was what was left of his sanity pleaded to take the first option, to get the help deep down he knew he needed, but before he could accept that, Sasuke's mind snapped as the curse mark began to radiate even more power, and its influence spread through his mind like an insidious poison, destroying the walls his sanity had created to hold back the crazed mindset the Uchiha held within him. You, you, you old bastard. I'll kill you. Sasuke's eyes swirled in the activation of his Sharingan as the curse mark spread through his body. Everything happened in moments as the boy lunged at the old Kage, who remained motionless. Before Sasuke could even move beyond the chair, his head was smashed through the desk and his arms pinned behind him as an Anbu calmly restrained him. The old Kage sat there, looked sadly at the boy. Option 2 it is. Uchiha Sasuke, from here on out, emergency clan restoration protocols have been enacted. Lizard, take him to the processing station within Anbu HQ and begin protocols immediately. Also ensure we have the curse mark sealed along with his eyes and chakra. I also want a mind healer to begin sessions immediately to see if he can be rehabilitated. Hi Hokage-sama. The Anbu responded before rendering the Uchiha unconscious and vanishing, removing the last loyal Uchiha from the room. Hiruzen's eyes slowly closed in sadness. I'm sorry, Itachi. I wish there had been another way, but it was just too late, it seems. Had Sasuke chosen the first option, he would likely have had a very successful shinobi career and seen his clan restored on his terms. Now he would be used to breed a new Uchiha clan, and once his 4 sons had been born, if he proved unable to be rehabilitated, he would be removed for the safety of the village. The old Kage sat down on his chair and released a long sigh as he felt his age once again upon him. Konoha. Shimura clan head home. Jiraiya walked up casually to a rather mediocre home of the village elder. While his clan's compound was among the smaller due to their low numbers, the home of their leader showed his views as both a shinobi and clan head. The wood was treated for resistance to the elements, but unpainted. The windows were small, but well placed to give excellent light, but stopping the chance of assassination, and the size was large enough to evoke an expectation of wealth, but small enough not to be ostentatious. Overall, it gave a presence of one who took few risks, did not spend unnecessarily, and who was cautious. The Sannin knocked on the door politely and was quickly ushered into a small, private room where the elder Shimura Danzo was waiting. A tea set was already in place, and as Jiraiya took his seat, the servant poured for both of them. Danzo was an old man of the same age as the Hokage. His left eye was covered in bandages, and his left arm was wrapped in a sling. The cane he used rested quietly nearby, giving mute testimony to its owner's need. I did not expect your visit, Jiraiya. What do I owe the pleasure? The elder asked. I had to deliver the good news myself, of course, the Sannin responded jovially. Danzo's face remained neutral as he responded. What good news would this be? Jiraiya reached into the pocket of his coat and removed a small stack of documents. Your arrest, of course. By order of the Hokage, you will be tried by military tribunal for the murder of the Uchiha clan civilians. Danzo's eye widened a fraction before narrowing. He made a move with his finder to press a button under the table before him and frowned when nothing happened. Don't bother. I know all about your secret passages and any. They have all been blocked. You can either come quietly, Jiraiya said as he rose from his seat and crossed his arms, leveling a glare at the old man before him, or I can execute you here and now for refusing the Hokage's orders. Which will it be? Danzo knew that one day he might need to flee from the village with Hisna behind him. Jiraiya had expected that and brought 40 Anbu with him. As he had been walking to the house with his obvious Anbu escort hidden, the remaining Anbu had proceeded to close every tunnel and escape route from Danzo's home. He would have to either go through Jiraiya to escape or come willingly. Those were his only options. Danzo knew if he went with the Sannin, his life was as good as over. If Hiruzen had finally made his move, then he had everything in place to end his life and remove him from the equation. Knowing this, the elder did the only reasonable thing. He attacked. If he could just get past Jiraiya, he could vanish down one of the other escape tunnels within his clan's compound and vanish with his Na. Jiraiya had been waiting for this. There was a specific reason he had been chosen to take Danzo in or kill him. He was a seal master, an expert against futon jutsu. As the trainer for the Yondaime, he knew exactly what could and could not be done by a futon user. And he knew exactly how to take someone like Danzo down. In essence, Jiraiya was the worst opponent for someone like Danzo. He knew Danzo wouldn't come quietly, and that an animal was always most dangerous when cornered, and Danzo was very much cornered. As Danzo made his move, Jiraiya merely stepped backwards and channeled chakra to a small seal he had placed as he sat down. The seal glowed before a small light shot upward, trapping the elder who had foolishly stepped forward onto it as he threw the small table between them toward Jiraiya. Danzo felt his chakra vanish in an instant before realizing his mistake. In his haste to strike, he had made a single miscalculation. Jiraiya was a seal master. Many shinobi had fallen into traps left by the gamma sanin made from the seals he could erect within moments. Just as Danzo felt the last of his chakra vanish into the seal, he witnessed the kunai pierce his throat. Jiraiya nodded with grim satisfaction. That was for all the deaths you've caused, you bastard. I hope you enjoy hell. Jiraiya finished his work by removing the elder's head and burning the body then and there. The Shimura clan would later be told the elder had committed treason and given a very subtle warning to be careful who they elected their leader in the future. Chapter 12. Konoha that evening. It's done, Jiraiya told his teacher from the nearby window as he looked out upon the village beyond. Hiruzen closed his eyes for a moment in recognition of the man's past service to the village before opening them and nodding quietly. Danzo may have been a bastard, but he had always been loyal to the village, and while he did not condone many of the actions he had taken, the old Kage understood their necessity. Silence permeated the room as the two old shinobi were left to their thoughts. Neither could fully condemn the man. His actions had been for the best in many cases, but nor could they truly agree with what he had done in attempting to create his own personal army. Finally, Jiraiya broke the silence, changing the subject to yet another failure of the village. So, you put the Uchiha kid under emergency clan restoration. Kinda harsh, don't you think, sensei? Jiraiya asked as he looked at the old man. That action had surprised even the Gamma Sanin. Sure, he expected the kid to get some serious browbeating and maybe a seal to negate the flight risk status or something, but not to have him locked up and basically turned into a breeding machine. While the law did exist, Jiraiya couldn't think of a single instance where it had actually been used in the entire history of the village. It was supposed to be a failsafe in case a clan was decimated and the remaining members attempted to turn traitor. No one ever really thought it might happen. Hiruzen felt the weight of all his years on him at that moment. When I called him here, I pushed him on purpose, he admitted. I wanted to force a reaction, see the true Uchiha Sasuke. I needed to see what kind of person he was, and if the report was accurate. What I saw reminded me too much of the madness I've seen in veteran shinobi who needed to retire or be sent on block-box suicide missions. It reminded me of Orochimaru's eyes when I found him that day. He couldn't accept anything beyond his own selfish ambition, and his bloodline is too valuable to the village to risk him running off. Add on the fact that Orochimaru is after him, and it's just a recipe for creating a dangerous monster that would come back to haunt us. At least this way the Uchiha clan will receive its fresh start that Itachi wanted. Jiraiya nodded in acceptance. And if we get Itachi involved in my spy network, we can work on putting the truth of the night out there while branding Danzo as the true evil behind the massacre. That would let Itachi take over as clan leader and possibly Hokage someday. In the meantime, I am going to attempt to rehabilitate Sasuke. I doubt it will work, but if there is a chance the boy can be brought back from that darkness, I will take it. I want you to seal his chakra, Sharingan, and that damned curse seal personally. Jiraiya nodded his agreement to perform the sealing. It bothered him seeing his teacher make such a decision, and even part of him questioned whether it was the right decision, but what was done, and there was nothing to be said about it. The Hokage's word was law even if some people didn't understand that. Hiruzen, however, was considering the best way to slowly turn Itachi from the mass murderer to the hero of the village. The idea, despite its obvious difficulties, had merit, but before deciding anything the old Kage looked at the clock nearby and internally sighed. It was too late to go into it, and shelved the idea for another day. Suna. Temari glared at the assembled council before speaking. I wish it to be noted on the record. I will accept to be offered in marriage contract to Uzumaki Naruto, and only him as part of the treaty to ensure the future of Sunagakure. Any other such candidates will be refused. Should Uzumaki-san refuse, then I will not make a second offer. Is this understood? His younger brother stood quietly behind his sister as he leveled his own glare at the Suna council, reminding them he would brook no politicking with his sister's life. One of the elder council members spoke. Tamara-san, we are grateful for your acceptance and understanding of the dire situation our village finds itself in. I won't beat around the bush like some of the younger members. Your sacrifice may be the difference between survival and destruction of our home. You have my and the village's deepest thanks. The council rose and bowed deeply to the girl, much to her shock. Unknown to her, Baki had made it expressly clear how Temari's acceptance was to be treated should she agree. And the council, not wishing to anger either Baki or her brother, had agreed without resistance to showing the girl respect for her actions. Baki nodded his own head to his former student before speaking as the council resumed their seats. We would like you to travel to Konoha to meet personally with the Hokage. I would normally send Gaara with you, but due to the current situation, it would be unwise to allow him out of the village. However, I will give you a full ANBU escort along with the already prepared escort for the reparations we will be sending with the caravan. Temari nodded, although Gaara frowned. He had wanted to accompany his sister, but his former sensei had explained in private why it would be a poor choice. With Suna's weakened state, if it was to be learned he was out of the village, another may take advantage by sending a swift strike force to assault the village itself or their outposts. His presence made them reconsider, and by the village breathing room. Temari had agreed to the precautions, and that was the only reason Gaara was allowing it to take place. Should Konoha accept, I, along with your brothers, will travel to meet you for the treaty signing and to offer our own congratulations, Baki informed her. Since the signing of a new treaty and the acceptance of her marriage would signal to everyone that Konoha would come to their aid, Gaara's presence would not be as necessary to cause their rivals to pause before attacking them. Further, the announcement of Uzumaki's marriage with Temari would only further stop many villages from even considering attacking the weakened Suna. Internally, Baki really couldn't believe how much the emergence of a single bloodline could shift the balance of power in the world. But when you consider how much raw power the Yondaime Hokage had shown, decimating over 400 enemy combatants in seconds, it wasn't surprising really. Should the boy grow up to be that skilled with his bloodline, the entire world would tremble at the might of him and his clan. Yes, it would be much better to side with him than against such potential. Please be prepared to leave day after tomorrow. And thank you again, Temari. Your village will be safe because of your actions. Konoha 1 week later. Naruto was soaked in sweat as he launched himself through yet another kata his godfather had been teaching him. According to him, it was a style developed by the toads that his father had used in conjunction with his Hiraishin to devastating effect. For the last week, he and Jiraiya had gotten into a good routine. They would wake up early, practice his kata, and perform resistance training, usually consisting of stretching, interval running, a multitude of strength and conditioning exercises meant to build endurance, reflexes, power, and strength, followed by chakra control exercises and light sparring. They hadn't gone too far into his bloodline ability yet. Jiraiya had wanted to focus on basics and fundamentals, which he claimed were absolutely horrendous. He pointed out that without control and a strong base, his bloodline could be a complete disaster on a battlefield, and even more, he shouldn't rely solely on his bloodline. Jiraiya had related story after story of Uchiha and Hyuga who had died from that very mistake. Following their morning training, the two would head to the Hokage Tower where they would meet with the Hokage, and Naruto would use his clones as runners throughout the village to relay information and messages between the Hokage and other important command centers. Thankfully, they had managed to get communication lines back up to all areas of the village, so Naruto was going to begin training under Jiraiya full-time, and once Jiraiya was satisfied, he'd start performing missions again with teams that needed some extra muscle. Naruto had been none too happy when the Hokage had decided to hold off promotions for several more months to give time, even for those he intended to promote, to season a little more. Naruto had wanted to yell at how unfair it was to the old man since he and Narashikamaru were the two chosen from his year group for promotion based on their performance during the invasion. But after Jiraiya had smacked him into the ground and run through several scenarios where Naruto had gotten his hypothetical team killed multiple times, he finally admitted he needed more training before being put in charge. Of course, it didn't stop him from sulking, much to Jiraiya's amusement. Jiraiya was monitoring his godson's progress and had been rather impressed. He figured the boy would take to his father's modified Toad Sage style, but it was like he was born and built just for it. Shrugging, he was just grateful he hadn't asked about his former teammate. Sure, he still might see that pink-haired girl every now and then, but Jiraiya had been working to keep him as busy as possible with training or studying. The sage sighed to himself as he accepted that eventually he would have to tell Naruto what happened to the Uchiha, but hoped he could keep the fallout from the boy down to a minimum. He definitely did not need Naruto barreling into ANBU HQ trying to rescue his supposed teammate. More surprisingly was the fact that Jiraiya had learned Naruto knew where ANBU HQ was. He was still trying to figure out how that had happened. Just as the Jiraiya called Naruto to a halt and tossed him a water bottle, an ANBU appeared and handed the white-haired man a message requesting both he and Naruto to meet the Hokage as soon as they could following their training. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow at that. Huh, that's strange. I thought Sensei didn't need us today for anything. Well, come on, let's grab a shower and get to the tower before he sends some monkeys after us. Naruto's eyes widened at the mention of monkeys. What? He'd actually do that? Jiraiya chuckled. Oh yeah, I was trying to do some extra research this one time before a long-term mission, and next thing I know, not only am I running for my life, but I have about a dozen chimps flinging feces at me. Not a good experience, my godson. Always remember, never make the monkeys angry. Naruto nodded slowly since Jiraiya seemed to be 100% serious, and considering the guy didn't mind pissing off Gamabunha on a regular basis, that said a lot. Hokage Tower. Naruto sighed as he was ushered through the door to the Hokage's office before coming to a complete stop and blinking. Hey, you're Gaara's sister, right? Temari, who up to that point had been having a rather pleasant conversation with the old Hokage about rebuilding relations between Konoha and Suna, was slightly miffed at the question. How could the boy she had come to marry not even give her enough thought to remember her name from the tournament held less than a month ago? She began to wonder what kind of moron she had agreed to marry. Glaring at her fellow blonde, she responded, keeping her slight anger out of her voice as best she could. I have a name, Uzumaki-san. It's Temari. And yes, Gaara is my brother, and he sends his greetings to you. Naruto grinned. I'm glad to hear it. I hope he's doing well. I consider him a good friend. That caused Temari to stop for a moment before her mind put the pieces together. Despite her best efforts, Gaara had remained silent on his sudden change in attitude, but now she was beginning to get a very clear picture. Gaara gets beaten by Uzumaki. He comes back to Suna in more control and, in his own way, more caring toward herself and Kankuro. Then he says he agrees to her marrying the Uzumaki. Now Naruto claimed friendship with her formerly unstable and psychotic brother. Her eyes widened slightly. Somehow Naruto had managed to change her brother. He had given her back her baby brother. He feels the same, Uzumaki-san, she told him, no longer sure how to approach the blonde before her. Hiruzen chuckled at the sight before him before couching politely. I assume you haven't heard, but Naruto has taken his father's clan name as well as his mother's. It's actually Uzumaki Namikaze now. Yeah, but just call me Naruto. You're Gaara's sister after all, he told her with a bright smile. So he is the Yondaime Hokage's son. She thought to herself, thank you. Please call me Temari, she responded. While they had heard rumors that Naruto was the son of the Yondaime Hokage, it had never been confirmed until now. So what's up, sensei? As entertaining as it is to see the kids flirt like this, I'm assuming you have a reason for summoning us. Jiraiya asked while grinning as the glare both teens sent his way. Actually, it was Temari who requested your presence, Hiruzen told him. All eyes then turned to the Suna girl, who took a deep breath before reaching into the satchel next to her and removing a document. She passed it to the Hokage, whose eyes widened slightly at the unexpected piece of information. Suna believes that while reparations and apologizes, along with a new treaty, are a wonderful step in the right direction to regain the former trust that we broke with our allies, we need to take a more permanent step in both show our willingness to rebuild our alliance and strengthening it for future generations. As such, and in order to ensure that future stability of the alliance between our villages Sunagakure and the Sabaku clan wish to offer a daughter and promising Kunoichi to Kanahagakure. To be more specific, I, Temari no Sabaku, offer myself in marriage contract to Namikaze Naruto to cement the alliance between our villages. Chapter 13. WHA. Naruto began before he found a large hand immediately over his mouth, with another pressing solidly down on his head to ensure he couldn't make a single sound. This is quite unexpected, and I speak for my godson when I say I hope you won't mind if we take time to consider this offer of such a promising and beautiful young woman as yourself before responding appropriately. Jiraiya said quickly as he struggled to keep his godson from making a gigantic mess of a very delicate political situation. Temari, for her part, looked from Naruto to the Sannin and got the distinct impression the very political and non-committal response was merely to buy time for the older shinobi to speak to his weight. Godson, you're Naruto's godfather? Temari practically yelled before blushing at her forwardness. Jiraiya grinned. Yep, and we actually have a remedial lesson that we are very, very late for. Why don't the two of you get together this afternoon? Once you have a chance to refresh yourself, and Naruto can give you a tour of the village, and the three of us can have dinner tonight. Yes, that sounds perfect, if you'll just excuse us. Jiraiya said as he shined out of the office with his struggling godson despite Temari's lack of response. Temari, for her part, was still trying to process the fact that her betrothed was the godson and apparently apprentice of one of the legendary Sannin. The old Hokage coughed slightly to get the girl's attention. I admit my surprise by the offer and can do nothing but thank Sunagakure and the Sabaku clan for their willingness and commitment to our alliance. Now, Nico, could you please take Tamarizan to her hotel room to allow her to refresh herself after her long journey? I am sure Naruto-kun will be by this afternoon to pick you up for your tour of the village. Temari nodded, still trying to compute everything she had just learned. Her potential betrothed was heir to the Uzumaki clan, heir to the Namikaze clan, son of the Yondaime, godson to Jiraiya of the Sannin, apprentice to the same Sannin, and had an apparently unknown Kekkei Genkai that could, by itself, alter the balance of power of the elemental nations. She could just feel the headache coming on. Konoha training ground 17 moments later. Jiraiya released Naruto only to immediately have the boy begin his tirade. What the hell, Irokiofu? What the hell was that? Why did you shut me up like that? What is a marriage contract? Why is Temari being ugged? Jiraiya had once again placed his hand over the blonde's mouth as he pinched the bridge of his nose. Okay, Naruto, I need you to be shut up and let me explain. I stopped you in there because this is one of those very delicate political situations. Remember what I said about you and delicate political situations? He asked him only to receive a nod as he slowly released his hold. You said I am terrible at them and am most likely to start a war, before somehow magically turning the entire country into my best friend and creating more paperwork than even Kami would know what to do with, right? The blonde responded. Jiraiya chuckled and nodded. Exactly. Now, will you let me explain what just happened, or do you want to yell some more and look like a total idiot? Naruto glared at his godfather as he seriously considered continuing to just yell at the older man before huffing and nodding his head for the older man to continue. Jiraiya grinned before sitting down and motioned for Naruto to do the same under the shade of a tree. This was going to take a while after all. Okay, so you know how Konoha and Suna have been working on a new treaty. We talked about that previously. Well, back during the time of the warring states when one side wanted to really enforce their commitment to a treaty, they would marry one of their women into the other clan, usually someone of a prominent family line, and vice versa. After all, there is no greater tie than blood. Now, this practice fell out of use with the founding of the shinobi village system. The reason you were about to screw up is that you were going to yell and throw a fit which could insult Suna, the village offering the contract, by potentially refusing the contract without knowing what it is and if it is tied into the entire treaty. For all we know, the treaty could hinge on our acceptance of the contract itself. But, more importantly, you were about to possibly insult your future wife. Do you really want your first meeting with Temari to be you screaming at the top of your lungs about something to which you have zero clue about? Possibly insulting her since it's obvious she agreed to the marriage, came all the way here to present it herself, and meet you. At this, Naruto paled considerably. Jiraiya had been trying to beat some political sense into his head since the council meeting. It was his way of trying to ensure Naruto didn't do anything stupid. But what really scared the blonde was the thought of insulting Temari and making her angry. He had seen angry women who couldn't when hanging out with Jiraiya, and he wanted to avoid that at all costs. Why? You don't think she's, angry, do you? Naruto asked with real concern lacing his voice. Jiraiya chuckled. Nah, I think we got out of there before she could get too mad at you. I see you realize why this could be bad if you had screwed it up. Okay, now let's turn this into a lesson. Temari will expect you this afternoon for a tour of the village, right? Jiraiya said. He had started throwing these real-life lessons into their training throughout the day to keep Naruto on his toes and also drive home important points. Whenever someone would show up with a political question for the Hokage or a tactical decision had to be made, Jiraiya would pull Naruto to the side afterward and repeat the scenario with slight changes for his godson. Naruto would then be expected to give an answer, and the two would go through why his answer was right, wrong, or both. These little quiz sessions usually didn't take long and gave Naruto some intense real-world experience. Yeah, but she's already visited the village before. So, that's not the real reason, right? Naruto said. Bingo, this is a chance for you two to talk and get to know each other. Just take her to the usual hot spots, the academy, Hokage monument, etc. Focus more on talking. Ask her about herself, her family, and Suna. I know you don't like talking about your childhood, but your pranks would likely make her laugh, and remember, girls like to laugh, especially at men, he was told. And I shouldn't bring up the contract, right? Naruto asked. Nope, let that be for later once Sensei and I have a chance to look it over. But I want to remind you about something. You have to take at least 2 wives to avoid the council trying to get at your clan's inheritance. One for the Namikaze clan and one for the Uzumaki. Temari would make an excellent matriarch for the Namikaze clan. She's a strong kunoichi that has extensive political training and is highly attuned to futon. Now, why is that important? Naruto scrunched his face for a moment before responding. Cause according to the village bylaws, I can only hold 1 seat at a time. So one of my future wives will have to hold the other one during meetings and votes. Which means that once the Uzumaki clan is officially accepted into the village, one of my wives will have to hold the seat for the other clan. Also, the Namikaze were well known as futon users, so Temari and I both having futon affinities would increase the chance our kids would have it right. With the mention of kids, Naruto began blushing up a storm. He was a healthy 13, almost 14-year-old, and hanging around Jiraiya had done wonders for his imagination of the female form. Jiraiya, for his part, couldn't be more proud at the rate he was cultivating Naruto's pervert side and internally grinned every time he caught Naruto glancing at the girls nearby when they were out in the village. Yes, my godson, you shall come to the pervert side, the Sannin thought to himself. Far away in a casino. What the hell? A man yelled at a blonde-haired woman who had just smashed the roulette wheel before her into tiny pieces. A black-haired young woman nearby stared in wide eyes at her master. LL Lady T.S. Tsunade. What? The blonde-haired woman with an overly generous bust glared at the table before her. I felt as if my old teammate was corrupting someone he shouldn't be. Shizun felt the palm of her hand strike her face as she groaned internally at the comment. Back in the training ground. Exactly right. I know it might not be exactly what you want, but she's a very pretty girl, highly intelligent, and comes with a lot of political points. So don't dismiss it out of hand. I'm not saying you should take it just for those reasons. After all, a loveless marriage isn't any good either, but don't dismiss it out of hand either, okay? Naruto nodded as the duo continued to discuss the marriage contract, its history, pros, and cons through the remainder of the morning. The Royal Leaf Room, 410. Temari tried once again to relax, as she felt the tension seep further into her shoulders. After the Nico Ianbu had shown her to her room, a rather nice suite at one of the more prestigious hotels in the Kanoa, she had mechanically taken a shower. Staying under the hot water far longer than normal had allowed her mind to process everything she had learned and come to several conclusions. First, Naruto was the son of the Yondaime, holder of an extremely valuable and powerful bloodline, and scion of two nearly destroyed but historically powerful clans. This would put a huge target on her back as the potential wife and mother of one of those clans. Second, her betrothed had the potential to be a political powerhouse in the world. While he might be the last of both lines, the Namikaze and Uzumaki were well-known clans before their downfalls. If he has access to their techniques and clan secrets, he could rebuild them and be the progenitor of an extremely powerful dynasty. A dynasty she could be the matriarch of. Third, she would have to accept he would need to take a second wife. Two major clans like that couldn't be merged. It had nothing to do with blood, but more to do with clan secrets, techniques, and traditions. Merging two clans was almost impossible. One would eventually be consumed in favor of the other, so it made more sense to keep them separate, thus giving them 2 seats on the village council. Throw in her own clan from Suna, and you had the potential to create another 3-way alliance like the Yamanaka, Nara, and Akamichi situation. Fourth, he was the godson of Jiraiya of the Sannin. That mean he would receive anything his godfather had to give him. That could be money, techniques, summoning contracts, etc. Not to mention it offered both her and her potential family a huge level of protection against previous enemies of the nearly destroyed clans. Fifth, Naruto was obviously not trained in politics. She had seen his initial reaction filled with confusion and emotion, not to mention how his godfather had shut him down to stop a potential international incident. Likely that meant he had not been in his godfather's care long, and potentially had grown up more similar to Gaara than she originally thought. And if he had grown up like Gaara, he may have his own issues, although his appeared more repressed, and she would have to help him deal with them as time went on. Temari sighed again, and she continued brushing her hair. It was one of the few things she did that would often relax her. When she was little, her mother had brushed her hair, and that memory was one of the few she cherished above all others. This got much more complicated in a very short time, she muttered to herself. Most of what she had figured out wasn't too big of a problem. After all, she couldn't get out of the contract unless Naruto refused it, and that wasn't likely to happen unless the Hokage and Jiraiya decided it was the best move. Sighing internally, her ears caught the sound of a knock at her door. Placing her brush on the bed she had been sitting on, the blonde Kunoichi moved quietly to the door and opened it. She was slightly surprised to see Naruto before her. She noticed he still wore the same orange and blue jumpsuit he had earlier, something she would be sure to fix as soon as she could. No betrothed or husband of hers would be wearing such a monstrosity. With a quick glance to see it was barely after 1, she had to fight the urge to raise an eyebrow. Sure, it was the afternoon, but she didn't expect him to be quite so early. Hi. I hope it's okay I came a bit early. I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time to see anything you might like, and I hoped we could get to know one another better, Naruto told her as his left hand moved to the back of his head, scratching it nervously. With a raised eye, the girl in front of him responded, "Did you think of that, or did Jiraiya?" she asked bluntly. Naruto blushed slightly. "Both," he responded honestly. "I wanted to get to know you better. You're Gaara's big sister after all. And once Orochiyofu explained everything to me, and he recommended I come early to make sure we had plenty of time." Temari nodded, enjoying the honest response. "Very well. Give me a moment to get ready, and we can head out."